Yes, so our meeting is now being recorded as well as being streamed to our Facebook Live page. Feel free to start when you're ready.
Okay, I'm good to start now. Janae, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. Let's get things kicked off. Good afternoon, everyone. It is 12 o'clock sharp on Thursday, February 23rd, 2023, and I'm calling to order the virtual meeting of the Los Angeles Probation Oversight Commission. I am Chair Jackson, and I'm glad to be here with you all this afternoon. There's quite a bit for us to cover today, so I'll turn it over to our Executive Director, Wendy Julian, to explain how you can participate in this meeting, followed by a roll call for the commissioners.
Thank you, Chair Jackson. So please participate in our meeting today. You can do so after every agenda item. Chair Jackson will present the item and then we'll take public comment and then any action will be taken. You can do that live here in the meeting by using the raise your hand function. It's at the bottom of my screen and most people's screen if you're on the computer. If you're on the phone, you can use the raise your hand function by dialing *3, and that will raise your hand in the list for us, and we'll call on you in the order in which hands are raised. If you'd like to offer your comments in writing, we also encourage that. If you do it by 5 o'clock today, we'll get it attached to the agenda officially and send it out to all the commissioners. You do that by sending an email to info@poc.lacounty.gov, and Janae is going to put that in the chat in a few minutes. Our meeting is being broadcast live to Facebook today, as you just heard. You can watch on Facebook Live, but there's no engagement with users. Also, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at LA County POC and sign up for our mailing list so that you can be in the know about what's going on. Una cordial bienvenida a personas en la comunidad quienes prefieren hacer sus comentarios públicos en español. Nomás tiene que levantar su mano usando el botoncito a la parte baja de la pantalla o en el teléfono marcando *3. Nomás díganos que prefiere hacer su comentario en español. Tendrá 4 minutos y podemos proveer traducción al inglés. Al iniciar su comentario, nomás avísenos si tiene su propio traductor o si quiere que yo lo haga. And I just realized when I said that in Spanish, I didn't say that public commenters will have 2 minutes today. That will be at the discretion of the chair based on how many people are signed up if she wishes to change that number. I'm going to call the roll. So commissioners, please unmute yourselves. Commissioner Dolores Canales.
Here, thank you.
Commissioner Frankie Carrillo.
Here.
Commissioner Jean Garcia Lays.
Here, can you hear me?
Barely. We can hear you. It's just pretty low. Commissioner Melinda Kakani.
Here.
Commissioner Sam Lewis. Commissioner Lewis is definitely joining today. I'll let you know, Chair Jackson, when he's on. Commissioner Don Meredith.
Here.
And Chair Shay Jackson.
I'm here. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you.
All righty, let's move on to item number 2, the approval of February 9th meeting minutes. Do we have any written or live public comment for this item, Wendy?
I'm looking at Janae's message. We do not have any written or public comment on this item.
All righty, commissioners, can I get a motion to approve February 9th meeting minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the February 9th, 2023 meeting minutes.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Kakani. Sorry about that. A second, please.
I second that.
All right, motion seconded by Commissioner Carrillo. Are there any changes to the minutes? Hearing none, commissioners, please unmute yourselves and vote with a voice vote.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. We will now move on to item number 3, where we will discuss and take any necessary action on the plan to ensure that the rights of incarcerated youth are safeguarded with the implementation of AB 2417, the Youth Bill of Rights. The requirement of the bill, they're outlined in the board motion that is attached to the agenda for today. And you'll see there that the POC has some specific role in ensuring that it is fully implemented in the county. And so here with us today are a few stakeholders who are going to present on this item so that we can learn how as commissioners can best support this effort. We have two well-respected experts on the topic. That is Elizabeth Liz Bronstein from LA County Public Defender's Office, as well as Laura Rodolfi from the Burns Institute. Liz and Laura, the floor is yours to present.
Good morning, POC, and thank you for having us. We're going to present today on AB 2417, a Bill of Rights for Incarcerated Youth. Next slide. Governor Newsom signed AB 2417 into law in September of 2022. Prior to AB 2417, youth that were all youth that were under the care and custody of the courts, whether in foster care or DJJ, were afforded certain types of rights and protections. And it was only the youth that were in county custody, in probation custody across the state, that didn't have those types of protections. So this law sought to build from former DJJ Bill of Rights and foster care Bill of Rights law and expanded those rights. Additionally, to strengthen the Ombudsman Office authority to effectuate their intent and to ensure compliance with 2417.
And I'll add one small thing here is that when the co-sponsors were working on AB 2417, we worked in concert with young people who were formerly incarcerated at DJJ and currently incarcerated at DJJ to get feedback on how the current Bill of Rights that was at DJJ was working for young people, and to hear more about whether there were other rights that they wanted to have included, and sort of got that whole stakeholder body included and incorporated into the rights that ultimately became 2417.
Next slide. So there's three questions about AB 2417 that we will present in this short presentation. Why the Youth Bill of Rights was needed, what the Youth Bill of Rights do, and what role the POC should play in the implementation of the Bill of Rights. Next slide. So prior to 2417, the Youth Bill of Rights existed in current California law, but it only applied to youth that were incarcerated at DJJ, the State Division of Juvenile Justice. And as you know, DJJ is closing its doors in June of 2023. Soon, counties will have the full responsibility for youth incarceration. And the shift from wholly county-based youth justice systems, along with mandates to support youth in a health-based rather than correctional environment, represents an unprecedented transformation of the state's juvenile justice system. When DJJ closes, there will be no Youth Bill of Rights to be in effect. Assembly Bill 2417, as I said, makes sure that youth that are in the county custody are receiving those same protections and those same rights, and that it also will ensure uniformity across the state. Next slide. So the Board of Supervisors in May of 2022 passed a resolution, even before the law passed, even before the legislature passed it, even before the governor signed it into law. And the Board of Supervisors found that the rights and protections that were afforded under the Bill of Rights aligned with the values of LA County. And therefore, it was really important that the Board of Supervisors make clear that those rights and protections were going to be afforded to all youth in LA County, whether they be in foster care, probation custody, or with the state. And to that end, bodies such as the POC are really instrumental, because that's the way that we can keep track of it, to speak with the young people to make sure that it's working. As Laura said, young people were consulted as part of the Bill of Rights to see what they needed, to see what they wanted, to see what types of protections needed to be guaranteed to them. And the only way for us to know if they're being protected is to speak with them in the halls, to speak with them in the camps. And it's really important that the POC, effectuate that, just as the ombudsman is necessary to effectuate that, to speak to the kids and regularly be a presence in those environments. Next slide.
So before we go through all of the rights that are enumerated in AB 2417, I want to take just a moment to acknowledge the current conditions in LA County. The Bill of Rights and the need to understand those rights and the mechanisms for protecting those rights is really critical all over California, but particularly in LA County, where we've seen time and time again allegations of abuse and mistreatment and serious human rights violations inside the facilities. Many of the folks in this meeting have seen or heard directly from young people horror stories of human rights violations, unsuitable conditions, dehumanizing treatment. So the role of protecting youth could not be more pressing than it is right now in Los Angeles County. The conditions are so egregious that, in my opinion, we need to get kids out of these facilities immediately, but that is well beyond the scope of what I was asked to comment on today. So we're going to just focus on AB 2417 and how that can serve to help protect young people and the rights that they should be afforded. You can go to the next slide. So I think it's important at the outset to acknowledge that AB 2417 does not create any new rights. Existing law in state law, federal law, and even UN conventions already required that counties provide basic protections that are listed in AB 2417, ranging from the right to have enough food, access to education, and good health care. But the relevant statutes and regulations are spread out over several codes through the Title 15 regulations, and the legal provisions are really long, they're complicated, they're hard to understand. And so Assembly Bill 2417 really works to put the most important rights for young people in one place in language that is more accessible, to ensure that young people know what their rights are. And it requires, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, that counties post the rights and make sure that young people have a copy of them and know what they are. So you can go to the next slide. So this is an overview of all of the rights that were enumerated in AB 2417. I'm not going to ask anybody to read them. They're not up there with the intention that you can actually see them. There is at the end of this presentation, which I believe will be sent out, an addendum that has all of the rights listed out, so you can read them. But they're listed here. There's 18 of them enumerated in A through R. And I think it's really important that we remember that this is the floor. These rights are the basic rights that young people in facilities need to have. And we're going to go over just a few of them today. We don't have time to go through every single one of them, but I want to encourage everyone to read these rights in their entirety, and to think about them. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to think about the implementation for the POC. But to think about how to use the rights when you're doing any inspections, and to read through them and get a full sense of what is included. So you can go to the next slide. So the first that we'll highlight is just some very, very basic human rights that are outlined in the bill. Here you can see, that there's the right to healthy and clean environment. There's the right to be free from physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. There's the right to receive healthy food and clean water and timely access to toilets. Very, very basic, fundamental human rights that, we have to enumerate because we have to make sure that young people are protected and have these rights. You can go to the next slide. And in addition to the, very basic human rights, AB 2417 also includes really important rights around education. Youth have the right to receive rigorous quality education, and that's something that was pulled directly out of the Title 15 regulations. They have the right to rigorous and quality education, and they have the right to post-secondary academic and career technical education courses. So I think it's important to note that while there's the basic human rights that are enumerated, there's also rights that are critically important for young people to know that they have access to, things like the post-secondary education. And Liz is going to talk a little bit about this, but I want to note here that youth have a right to these services and programs and education even when they're in disciplinary status. So they can't use that against a young person for receiving any of the rights that are enumerated in AB 2417. Liz, or you can go to the next slide.
So there's also the right to exercise and rights against deprivation. The Bill of Rights requires that youth have daily opportunities for age-appropriate physical exercise and recreation. And it contemplates, with the closure of DJJ, that age appropriate means up until the age of 25 who are housed in our facilities in the county. And you know, the Bill of Rights talks about daily opportunities to go outside, which I know sometimes is a struggle, as well as access to leisure reading, letter writing, and entertainment. It also talks about youth not being deprived of any of the following, not being deprived of bedding or access to family or parents, visitation, bedding, clothing, daily shower or toilets, or medical services, or the right to receive mail. And also it specifies that a youth cannot be subject to room confinement as a disciplinary measure. These are the basic rights that, like Laura said, are all throughout Title 15 and all throughout different places of the Welfare and Institutions Code. But in this place in the Bill of Rights, they're listed all together. And it's something for the POC and other bodies, as well as our youth in custody and their parents to read and become familiar with. Next slide. The other thing that's really important, which is certainly a change for the counties from DJJ, a new right that county probations probably aren't quite used to, is the right to visitation. The Youth Bill of Rights defines visitation to include others outside the immediate family. They talk about extended family members, and extended family members are defined as any adult related to the youth by blood, adoption, marriage, established familial or mentoring relationship, including but not limited to godparents, clergy, teachers, neighbors, and family friends. So that certainly widens the group of visitors that the youth should have access to, because we are looking to support them, and the Bill of Rights is cognizant of that. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Great. So, a crucial component of the Bill of Rights is making sure that young people know what their rights are. And AB 2417 includes language on the responsibility of the facilities for this. So facilities must provide an orientation that includes an explanation of and copy of the rights. Facilities have to post the rights in a conspicuous location, including classrooms and living units. And a copy of the rights have to be provided to the young person's parents or guardians in a language that's requested by the parents or guardians. So really making sure that that the information is given to the kids about what their rights are. And then I'll note here too that another provision of AB 2417 is that the new Office of Youth and Community Restoration has to consult with youth and advocates who represent youth to develop a standard format for the rights that explain the rights in a youth-friendly way by July 1st of this year, and so that there will be a standard way in which these rights are provided to young people in facilities throughout the state. Next slide. So taking a step back for just a moment, and you can go ahead and click again. I think there was an animation that didn't go through. There you go. I want to just talk briefly about the Office of Youth and Community Restoration. It's that new agency that I just mentioned. So in 2020, with SB 823, the legislation that is ultimately going to close DJJ, it also created the first ever statewide agency to oversee the care and custody of youth in the justice system. The office has a bold mission that you can see up here on the screen, and one really critical role of OICR is the Office of the Ombudsperson. And 2417 really fulfills the promise that's represented with this new Ombudsperson by ensuring that the young people who know their rights, and then they know who to reach out to for help if their rights are being violated. So you can go to the next slide. And you can go ahead and, there you go. So the Office of the Ombudsperson plays a critical role in following up on complaints for a young person. So the Office of the Ombudsperson has to investigate complaints from youth in facilities and follow up with that complaint in writing on what the action is that's taken. And the action could include an investigation, referral to another department or agency to follow up on the decision, on the complaint, or a declination to investigate. And that again has to be, information on that has to be provided back to the young person. Really important is that the ombudsperson has to provide regular reports to the legislature about what's happening with complaints, what kind of complaints they're receiving and what the findings of those complaints are. And so that means that it's really important that the ombudsperson is aware of all of the things that are happening in facilities throughout the state so that they can report that information to the legislature, and we can change law at the state level when we need to, if there are rights that are being consistently violated, that we can start seeing some of the systemic problems and come up with systemic solutions. The ombudsperson has the authority to meet with and communicate privately with young people and to access and visit and observe facilities where young people are with 48 hours notice, which hopefully will change soon. And then I just have up here too this flyer that the Office of Youth and Community Restoration put out that gives information on the ombudsperson that young people in facilities should have. It has information on how to contact the ombudsperson and what they should do if they have a complaint that they want to put forward. You can go to the next slide.
I'd like to add that, the youth that are coming from DJJ are actually given a workbook when they first get to DJJ, and it's several pages and it enumerates all of their rights. And they learn them. There's quizzes on them, and it helps them understand what the rules of the situation are, what they're entitled to, what they're not entitled to, and it lays it out. And I think that it's much clearer for everyone. One of the things that I failed to recognize, which I think needs to be added as well, is one of the enumerated rights in the Bill of Rights talks about a grievance process as well as a right to appeal some type of an accusation of misconduct. Now that we're not dealing with the state anymore and that all kids are on probation to the court, before a child comes to court and faces accusations, there should be some type of process where the accusations for misconduct are brought to their attention and they have the right to appeal it as at the state level. And that's one of the things that is enumerated in the Bill of Rights. Thank you.
So, wanted to just talk briefly about the role of the Probation Oversight Commission in the implementation of AB 2417. And this is just a sort of brainstormed list. I think there's a lot more that maybe we can dialogue about. But, first, take a look at the Bill of Rights, read through the list of the Bill of Rights and just know what they are. And then some things to think about during inspections. Check to see if the Bill of Rights are posted. Check if the orientation of the Bill of Rights is happening with young people. Observe whether there's things that you see that are not aligned with what the young people rights that should be protected. Ask the young people about the specific rights that are enumerated in 2417. And then, just a reminder of something that Liz talked about earlier in the Board of Supervisors motion that was passed last year in support of AB 2417. One of the things that it said is that success of protecting young people's rights is really going to be measured in hearing from young people, in hearing how they feel safeguarded, if they feel their rights are being safeguarded. So really talking to young people and hearing their experiences and their stories about what's happening right now is critical to that. And then ensuring, of course, that the young people know how to contact the Office of the Ombudsperson and contact the Office of the Ombudsperson. And again, I'll just reinforce that that's critically important so that there can be a record statewide of what's happening in facilities, particularly in LA and particularly right now, so that we can make sure that there's the right kind of action being taken to protect young people on a more systemic level. And then, for the POC also to maintain open lines of communication with the Ombudsperson. This is a critical new role that we have in the state of California. And so really important that to establish relationships with that office to make sure that they're aware of everything that's happening on the ground right now. You can go to the next slide. And that's it. I know we went through this at sort of rapid speed. We were asked to give just a sort of brief overview of the rights, but I'll pass it back to whoever is taking the next steps here. That's the end of our presentation.
Thank you both for presenting on this item. I think we'd like to go to public comment. Wendy, can you facilitate that before we bring it back to commissioners for discussion?
Yes, thank you. And as Liz said, we are going to attach the PowerPoint to the agenda and minutes If you'd like to make public comment on this issue, please use the raise your hand function or dial *3 if you're calling in. I'll give you a second to do that. Also, I'll note, Chair Jackson, that Commissioner Lewis joined early on in that presentation, so we've got everybody here today.
Great,
Don't
welcome, Sam.
see. Okay, there we go. We'll start with Elida Ledesma. And Elida, if you give us a second, we'll unmute you and put the timer up. And you are unmuted.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alida Ledesma. I'm the Executive Director of the Arts for Healing and Justice Network. And I had just a couple of questions in terms of the Bill of Rights as it was used in the state facilities. Sort of what was the rate of youth actually contacting and requesting sort of support? Were there any barriers in young people being able to report? But also just challenges around retribution for young people who report any violations of their rights. And then also if you could talk a little bit about how the adults or the staff are trained or introduced to the Bill of Rights, if they are walked through, if they're given the same packets, information as the young people. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands, and we didn't have any pre-registered comments. So I will turn that back over to you, Chair Jackson.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I actually thought that those were great questions that came in through public comments. So if Liz or Laura, either of you want to address them, you're welcome to.
I can't speak to the reporting of the complaints and follow-up of the state ombudsperson at DJJ, but I can say around there's nothing in the law that requires training of staff on this, but this is another place where the ombuds office and the Office of Youth and Community Restoration can play a really important role, because I mentioned that the ombuds office is one of many duties of the office. They also play an important role in providing training and technical assistance. And so it's important, if there are needs at the county level for training that impacts the role of OICR, to, you know, let OICR know that that kind of training and technical assistance would be useful to the county.
Yeah, I agree. I echo what Laura said. I don't know of any training that's required at the state level or at the county level of staff. I would hope that staff across the state is trained, because it's very important. And with regards to retaliation, the Bill of Rights specifically states that youth should be free from retaliation, but of course it's a concern that we all have.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your remarks on that. Commissioners, do we have any comment on this item? Okay, Commissioner Canales, you're up.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you for your presentation on AB 2417. I look forward to looking for it being posted up, and most of all, talking to the youth to ensure that they've understood the full implementation. But one thing that I really want to address is the fact that we even had to put this in a Bill of Rights for our youth institutions and facilities. The fact that we had to put forth a motion to ensure that they have clean water, to ensure that they have access to toilets, I think speaks volumes. And so that's all pretty much that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I would just add that, you know, I believe that part of the reason probation gets away with as much as it does is because the Dane youth and their families are not always aware of their rights, you know, and they don't always understand their power, and probably believe that the authority of probation overrides the protection of their basic rights, right? And so with the implementation of this bill, I'm really hoping that we can question that less and have more faith in the system, knowing that youth are more equipped with this knowledge and the ability to report mistreatment while they're in these facilities. We want our kids to be more educated and empowered to act on their own behalf. And so I'm believing that this is in part a measure to do that. Commissioner Kakani.
Thank you, and thank you so much for that presentation. I have a couple of questions. The first is related to the The ombudsperson and the grievance process. So there, as you know, as part of the DOJ settlement, there has been an attempt at revamping what the grievance process looks like internally. There's this build out of, like the first process and like a check on probation's kind of internal grievance assessment. So I'm just curious how the ombudsperson interfaces with like what is already an internal grievance process, and if there's kind of any sort of communication, or if it's a totally separate path for young folks to assert a grievance.
Well, certainly the goal would be that if a young person has a complaint, they don't have to figure out which avenue to take it, that the complaint is taken seriously by all avenues and all grievance processes. The extent to which any local grievance is forwarded to the Office of Youth and Community Restoration's Ombuds Office, I think is a question we should be posing to the Ombuds Office and to the local grievance process to make sure that there is communication there, and that if there isn't communication there, we figure out a way for there to be, because it should not be incumbent on the young person to know where their complaint needs to go. They should, if they have a right that's being violated, it should be taken seriously, and it should be, up to the professionals in the room to make sure that it is followed to the full extent by all available resources.
I guess at this point, is it okay for me to ask a question of probation then? Yeah, okay. I guess so for those who are on the call, maybe it's Mr. Bettino. I mean, I'm curious how probation seeks to ensure, or Ms. Fletcher, that when a young person makes a grievance, that it goes through your usual channels, that it makes its way to the first folks, and that also makes its way to the office of the ombudsperson.
I'll tell you what we've done so far. So with the implementation of AB 2417, we have certainly been in contact with Judge Lucero, who oversees OYCR. The ombudsperson has been here in the facility, I believe, 4, if not 5 times in the recent weeks to talk to youth. What we did previously as part of the DOJ settlement, so last fall, we posted infographics that list youth's Bill of Rights that were approved through the DOJ monitor and that settlement agreement. Most of what is included in Assembly Bill 2417 is what is on our infographic. That infographic will change to be updated to include, I think there's just maybe 2 items in the Assembly Bill that were not on the infographic. So as soon as OYCR designs the posters, it looks like from the legislation and through conversations, they will provide that to local facilities. But what we have on our infographic is the listing for our own internal ombudsperson, who then can be in contact with the individual who is the ombudsperson for OYCR. So we want to make sure that that is integrated so that processes are in place to make sure that all the grievances and concerns are addressed. We have our infographics posted in the units. We have it posted on our website for parents and families, and it's also included all of the youth's rights in the orientation packets that they receive when they come into the facility. So we'll continue to work with OYCR, Judge Lucero, and our ombudsperson from the state to make sure that we are in compliance with the Assembly Bill and all of the language that is involved. But grievances, we have an automated system for grievances, and I think maybe even at a future meeting, we could certainly do a presentation about that. I think you heard a little bit about it at the last meeting, but that is operational for our youth to be able to file grievances. The first team is about uses of force, not necessarily about the grievances, so kind of parallel processes.
So I don't know if that totally answers my question then. So separating out the first team, if a young person were to submit a grievance into that, those boxes that are throughout a hall or a camp, I'm assuming that goes to internal probation staff, be it the supervisor, higher ups, whatever it is. How do you ensure that that goes to your internal ombudsperson and or the ombudsperson that lives within OICR?
So so we have the paper process, which has been used for a very long time for grievances. That remains in effect, but we also have the ability for our youth to file grievances electronically through the use of iPads. We have grievance officers who are assigned to handle those grievances. We can go back and check exactly what they consider in terms of how they decide where to send that grievance. Is it to the ombudsperson? Many of the grievances go right to the bureau chief, depending on what is contained in that grievance and what is alleged. And so there are a couple of different avenues how they are reviewed and handled, but certainly we can get you some more detail on that.
Okay, sorry, I'm still just struggling with that answer. I mean, there's a Bill of Rights that was laid out for us, right? So it's very clear kind of what a young person is entitled to, at least as it relates to AB 2417. And so if a young person either makes a complaint through the LACO computers, the iPad, the paper process, is it not a pretty simple calculation as to whether or not it falls within what's been laid out in AB 2417? And whether then that should be forwarded to the ombudsperson within the OICR.
Certainly, and we don't have the finalized version from OICR, right? They have until July 1st to be able to issue that and to make sure that staff are receiving the appropriate guidance. I think the statute actually outlines that they want to make sure that there's consistency throughout the state. And so that will come with that piece of it to be able to pull off those ombudsperson grievances that should rise to that level, but many of the grievances are handled at a much lower level as well.
I guess I'm curious, Laura and Liz, if you have any thoughts on either how other jurisdictions are handling this to ensure that it's not like this two like separate silos, because I feel like a lot gets lost when that's the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still so new that there isn't any other jurisdictions to look to for best practice, but I think that doesn't mean that a best practice can't be developed in LA County, and to acknowledge, you know, sort of what we're talking about, which is that we want this to be followed up to every extent possible. And so there's nothing that would preclude setting up a policy to make sure that every grievance that falls under AB 2417 or, you know, is forwarded to the office of the ombudsperson so that it can be incorporated into the report that they give to the legislature and thought of in terms of looking at all of the issues systemically from their vantage point at the state level.
We also want to make sure that, you know, the grievances have an element of anonymity, you know, that those grieving can remain anonymous, because otherwise, making a grievance to probation and having somebody from probation internal affairs come in and do an investigation could be chilling the entire intent of, you know, the entire intent behind the law. Kids have to feel that they're comfortable making grievances and that they are free from retaliation.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kakani, for your remarks there. Commissioner Garcia-Lays.
Hi, thanks. First, can you nod if you can hear me? I was having microphone problems earlier. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have not talked about grievance procedures in a little while, although that is squarely in our wheelhouse. So I wonder maybe if, Wendy, you have some things to say about this conversation so far. But before I ask you, I just wanted to get some of my thoughts out and maybe to move the conversation along. So the challenge I see with getting young people to make complaints and file grievances really have to do with the approach doesn't often see things through the eyes of the young people, right? So you're a young person. One, as a young person, you don't have the rights that adults have. Two, you are in a situation where you have waived a lot of your legal rights as part of an adjudication. You also are in a situation where you're told this is supposed to be punishment. I mean, perhaps we say that juvenile process is supposed to be entirely rehabilitative and not punishment, but that's not the way young people experience it or expect it to be. So the question then is in their minds, how bad does it have to be before it's not the normal bad that's supposed to be? It's the bad that's not supposed to be. And that's a really difficult question. So having a Bill of Rights, I think, is definitely a step in that direction. But even then, it's not clear. So you're what, free from physical violence, except when you start it, except, or I mean, just sort of daily violations, being told you're not allowed to talk, right? That feels like a violation to most young people, I think, most of the time when they want to talk. And yet sometimes you're able to be told you can't talk, but are you always, can you be told to always not talk, right? So I'm thinking of lunches. I believe you're supposed to be allowed to talk at lunch, but then sometimes you're not. So all of these things are actually very difficult to figure out whether they're violations or not. So I think having one more person to complain to is probably not going to get us to what we're trying to get to. But what is helpful here is a step towards being able to articulate to young people what is a violation of their rights in the situation they're in and what isn't. But even this Bill of Rights is still pretty vague, which brings the next step, which is it's all supposed to be explained to young people. And they need advocates. They need somebody to help them with this. I used to be a high school teacher, and I used to teach as a writing assignment how to fill out complaints against police officers when you've been stopped. And I will tell you that in my experience, only 1 out of every 50 students I had was actually able to write a complaint with enough specificity that it would result in action. So young people can't do this on their own. So until we have a way of educating young people in a discursive way, where there's a back and forth, where there's a conversation, where there's real talk about punishment and rights, and until people have advocates to help them make these complaints, I think we're still a long ways from where this bill is trying to get us to go. So having shared all those ideas and curious what other people's thoughts are, I would like to hear from Wendy on the specifics of our role in creating and overseeing the grievance procedure and this bill.
Thank you, Chair Jackson. Is that all right for me to respond?
Yes.
So the Probation Oversight Commission in our ordinance has a very specific role in grievances, which is to create an external grievance procedure. In fact, there's a whole section of the org chart that is for a program director and a number of staff that would be separate and apart from the Brown Act body of the Probation Oversight Commission to receive and review those grievances and then partner with the Office of the Inspector General for that process. As you all know, that has not happened. None of those positions have been funded through the POC. And so there has not been that external grievance process created. I was actually very happy to learn about the OICR ombudsperson, partially because of that, because it creates an external grievance process. It's not through the county, it's through the state, but it does have a similar perspective in the sense that it is an opportunity for a young person to file a grievance that doesn't get treated through the internal system. So I'm interested to hear Deputy Chief Fletcher's comments, and I think I agree with her that we should agendize this specific topic for a future meeting because it's my understanding that the probation department is in the process of changing over to a new electronic grievance system. In fact, we've been told it won't be fully implemented until 2024. So if those laptops are being used, I'm glad to hear it, but I don't think that's been implemented at all of the facilities yet. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that, Deputy Chief Fletcher. But as far as the Bill of Rights goes, I think you're absolutely right that the role of the Probation Oversight Commission is to incorporate into our general inspections and our spot inspections, our unannounced inspections, those questions that Liz and Laura laid out on the chart, which is to say, do you know how to file a grievance? Do you know what the OICR office is? Do you know what the ombudsman's office is? Just kind of general questions to ensure that that's happening. And then also ourselves to look, do you see the poster? Do you see the grievance box? Is there a grievance officer on staff today? Does the staff know what the process is? Just to check in on those procedures. And Dr. Reynoso is working, it's actually her idea to have this presentation today, closely with the groups who are working to implement the Youth Bill of Rights, as well as how to incorporate that into our official inspection procedures and our unofficial inspection procedures. So I think we have a direct role. I'll also say that the ombudsperson for OYCR has indicated that she would like to come and speak to the commission to share her perspective on this. And I think now that she's been in the job for a little while, she's still very new in the role, she'll have some sense of how to go forward and how to encourage us to work with young people and their families to get those grievances to her.
Thank you, Wendy. Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Commissioner Chair Jackson. I have a question for Chief Fletcher or other senior staff that might know. What is your average number of grievances that you receive now? And a second part to that, if you have the answer to the first.
Commissioner Lewis, I don't have that number off the top of my head. We certainly can search for it real quick and see what that is.
And the reason why I ask is I've asked some that, like the water issue. It took months for W unit to get their water fountain fixed. Other units were using coolers. Like there was a general consensus that it took way, way too long. And so I had asked them, I said, well, didn't y'all put in a grievance? And they all kind of like looked at me like, well, I was like, did y'all put in a grievance? And they was like, no. I was like, why not? What do you think their response was?
I don't know.
That's snitching. Just being totally transparent. I had to have a whole conversation with the group that I normally work with. That's not. You have a right to water. You have a right, like you're human beings. Yeah, well, that's not that. The problem is that one, that belief system there, but you also have, and not all staff, you have some great staff there. You also have some staff that if a kid files a grievance, and this happened not too long ago, he's labeled as a snitch, and then the other kids will jump on him. So how are we going to shift that? Because that's a fact. And the reason why I asked how many grievances do you actually get, I'm asking because I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing it's probably a very small amount. And the reason why it's a very small amount is because of what I just shared with you. Thank you.
And Commissioner
Thank you,
Lewis,
Commissioner.
one of the staff just updated and said that at Central, they average about 40 on average. And then certainly I can provide an update maybe to you offline or here about what was going on with the water there and how fresh water is brought into those units. But to answer your first question, about 40 for Central, and we'll pull that up for Barry J as well.
Thank you for that, Ms. Fletcher. You know, I do agree with Commissioner Lewis that there's a real culture that discourages youth from filing complaints or grievances. And that's one thing that's going to be difficult, in my opinion, to overcome outside of being able to articulate what their rights are and have them truly understand what that means. Probation leadership, hearing all the concerns that commissioners have about whether this measure is in place or not, we still might not be successful, knowing that we have some other challenges surrounding that. Do you have any ideas about what kind of mechanisms we could use in the future to address those things, culture, you know, their misunderstanding what their rights are?
Sure. So I think it would be great for us to have our own ombudsperson go into the facilities. Our staff do encourage our youth in many instances to use the grievance process to express their concerns. I think many of our staff feel, you know, that the kids know their rights far more than our staff sometimes will articulate. It might be a great idea to have some of the commissioners come in and go into the units. We could have small town hall meetings with the POC and probation staff to talk to youth about their rights, because we do want them to speak up, right? I think we all know that we want to be aware of what's going on, and sometimes we don't always hear it, right? We need to rely on some of the youth to be able to articulate, and that's why we want the youth councils to be in place so that they can push forward concerns that the youth have in our custody and care as well. So if you're interested in doing that, we would love to be able to facilitate those open discussions with the kids in the unit.
Absolutely. I'm actually glad that you're saying that, because I had it noted here as a potential way that we could address this. What's the status of the youth councils? I think they were suspended for a little while, or you guys are rethinking the model?
I'll verify the actual details, but I believe they are operational at both facilities now. I did witness one in action at Barry J about a week ago, but I believe it's up and running at Central as well. And then I just got some updated numbers. It looks like the average monthly grievance filing is at about 50 at Barry J and about 40 at Central.
Is there any way to document that? Because I'm sorry, but I'm not very trustful in currently in this moment. Like, because I asked about W Unit why they didn't. Like, I'm transparently clear of having the igloos that were not available for other units, and why they, because igloos were never used before. And so I asked, like, why is that there? Well, we don't have water. Why you don't have water? Because it's broken. How long has it been broken? So I'm clear of what happened and why it happened, but I'm also clear that why didn't y'all complain about it and the response to that? And so when they say there are that many grievances, like, is there a way to document that, to verify that these grievances have actually been filed? Because I could throw a number out there and say there were 1,000 grievances filed when in fact there were not. I want to just make sure that young people do understand that they have the right and they should be empowered to file a grievance without a stigma being attached to it. And I know how the system often works. When you do file a grievance and it's a powerful grievance, then there's an attempt to often undermine that. And that's just how systems work. And I'm as I dig into this particular system, I'm beginning to see exactly what people mean by it's hard to reform a system that's functioned for so long, that the mindset is that this is how it works. This is how we've been doing it for 30 years. 30 years is not, that's an old playbook. This is a new time, a new age. And so is there a way to factually verify that, either through our executive director to be able to see these grievances, or some type of other form of documentation to verify that that's the actual number that's filed on a monthly basis?
Correct. So that's the average, and there are grievance logs that the POC has the ability to review as requested. So we can make that happen for sure.
Who keeps the logs?
Our grievance officers keep the logs.
That's kind of like the fox guarding the hen house, isn't it? I mean, that should be someone independent from that, because it doesn't track with me. And a separate system, I think. But if we can review the logs, I'd love to be able to review the logs.
Yes, and just to clarify, so the individuals who are the grievance officers are not embedded in the facility. They are assigned under our compliance and evaluation unit, so they are separate from the actual operations of the facility. But we would be happy to get you in to look at those logs.
Thank you. We need to move on pretty quickly, so we would allow Commissioner Canales and Carrillo to speak before we do that.
Thank you so much. Yes, I just wanted to address the issue of the ideology of, the grievance process being a form of snitching. I know there is that culture and that mindset, but I do have a solution. So I would really like to make an appointment with this individual that was wrongfully convicted at 15 years old. After 20 years, was fully exonerated by District Attorney Gascon, and is a proficient attorney. I don't want to say jailhouse lawyer, but that's what this person was referred to, and actually wants to work with youth and wants to set up like legal type training in the youth facilities. And I think that it's so important that we bring in a person like this that has been successful in lawsuits and litigation while inside, was convicted as a youth, knows everything about the youth system, and has been wanting to get involved. Every time I've taken this individual inside, the first thing the youth asked him was like, oh, were you on a snitch yard? Were you on a S&Y yard? Were you a pesete or a PC? And he's like, no, you know, I paroled from general population. And that right there catches their attention. And, you know, so I want to start really bringing in individuals, especially when we look at youth and say, oh, they're the problem. Let's get them to the county jail. No, it might be that they need different mentors. And that's what we need to start broadening our own horizons and looking at. But I have somebody that I'm very interested in bringing along to the meeting that is wanting to use, as a matter of fact, his lawsuit funding geared towards helping the youth right now. So that's my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carrillo.
Thank you, Chair Jackson. I know time is tight, so I'll make it very brief. You know, listening. Well, first of all, Liz and Laura, thank you so much for this great presentation. And you know, I want to also thank Commissioner Lewis and Commissioner Gonzales to really triggering what I'm going to say next, and that's, you know, this focus on the grievances. You know, I totally get the fact that, you know, when people think about guerrilla warfare, you're really using your opponent's strengths against them. And in this case, probation is using the kids' strengths of like not snitching as, you know, use it against them. So like whatever's going to happen, you know, their culture is designed to like hush, hush, don't say anything. My 5-year-old and my 9-year-old, I recently heard them say in their elementary school amongst their friends when something was going on, no names, no names, as if like that's kind of where it starts. So like this stuff is not just in the juvenile halls, obviously. As I mentioned before, almost, I think at this point now it's 30 years ago, I too was under this guise of you don't say anything. But after I was almost killed by a probation officer at Central Juvenile Hall and saw the doctor, and they put me in a little room and handed me a tablet of paper and a pencil and a dictionary, I wrote a couple pages, my version of a grievance about what had happened. 30 plus years later, I am still waiting for a response. I'm happy to hear these grievances still remain. I hope to, you know, come with you, or who wants to come with me, to see if they go back that far, so we can see what actually happened as a case study here. And yes, somebody mentioned 30-year-old practices still happening today. I really hope not, because if they're still happening today, what I'm describing right now is are speaking of human rights. These are human right violations. So it's more about a statement. I don't need a response to this, other than just to let you know that I really hope that these Bill of Rights are taken serious, and that these allegations are heard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much for those remarks. We will certainly agendize this item. We'll discuss it in the future and invite the presenters to come back and speak to the bill. Wendy, is there a deadline on our report back or anything like that for implementation?
There is. It's not actually a report back. We're responsible for conducting, and I want to use the right word, and Liz might actually know exactly what the right word is. I want to say it's a survey of youth to ask about the implementation of the Bill of Rights, but it has been pushed back. So we are specifically responsible for interviewing youth in a survey format. I actually had a conversation with the alternate public defender about this, about how we could do something similar to what Dr. Reynoso and the OIG did with the OC spray, and with the support of Defense Counsel, go in and talk to youth about their experiences with the Bill of Rights specifically. So what Deputy Chief Fletcher recommended goes along very nicely with that. So it's not so much a report back as actual action on our part to do that.
Okay, well, I'd still like to discuss that in a future meeting and have some really concrete information about how the POC plans on upholding its oversight responsibilities in that respect. I'd like to move on to item number 4, which is to discuss and take any necessary action on the issues with substance use in facilities and the program and treatment options available or that should be available to address the root causes of substance abuse amongst youth and in custody, so many of whom have experienced complex trauma. We learned of this issue during our current inspection cycle, and thanks to the advice of commissioners, we decided to focus on the issue from a treatment standpoint to learn about the available options and push for the implementation of best practices. We're also pushing for the accessibility of Narcan to prevent the potential tragedy similar to the one that occurred in San Diego in a juvenile facility last year that resulted in a young person's death, which is really, really tragic to learn of that. We had such great response to the agenda item, and there's been so much discussed. So today we are going to hear some really basic introductions from our panelists. We're pleased to announce that the POC staff are going to work with these panelists today and offer, a much longer symposium where we can really dive into these issues and hear from youth and families on what they think we need in order to make this effort more successful and to get the facilities equipped with what they need to address the issue at its core. And so Dr. Reynoso, our project director of programs and services, she's going to introduce the topic and our panelists today.
Thank you, Chair Jackson, and good afternoon. As many of you know, in my former role as a mental health clinician, I had the privilege of directly serving youth across the juvenile justice setting. Within this work, I served young people on a continuum of mental health problems, ranging from depression, anxiety, behavior impairments, developmental and academic challenges to complex trauma. Along with these problems, many youth also reported significant substance abuse issues, which, as you may imagine, further complicated their struggles with mental health. In my capacity, providing services that targeted youth's mental health needs and addressed their struggles with substance use has always been important to me. Not only is it important because our youth deserve high quality, tailored treatment, but my personal connection to this work continues to inspire my commitment to it. My sister struggled with methamphetamine addiction, beginning in her teenage years through adulthood. I have firsthand knowledge of how individuals, families, and communities struggle and are profoundly affected by substance abuse and addiction. I'm so glad that we are here talking about this today, proud that the Commission has committed to talking about this important issue. As I know, as you all know, many youth continue to struggle. I will not formally be introducing our esteemed panelists, as they will do that themselves, but I do want to share one thing. Again, in my former role with DMH and through other professional development opportunities, I had the pleasure of working with our first panelist, Dr. Rachel Castañeda, who is not only a renowned expert in the field of adolescent addiction medicine and treatment, but is also a caring, compassionate human who is deeply committed to the well-being of children, youth, families, and communities. To follow Dr. Castañeda, we will also hear from the Department of Mental Health team, Dr. Karen Streich, District Chief, and Dr. Hanu Demirla, Supervising Psychiatrist, both over the juvenile halls and camps. And we will also hear from the Substance Abuse Prevention and Control, also known as SAPC team within Public Health, Ms. Elizabeth Norris-Walzak, who is the Section Manager for Youth and Family Services. Finally, available to answer our questions, we have our team probation partners, Bureau Chiefs Valerie Van Kirk and Jennifer Kaufman, and Dr. O, Medical Director with Juvenile Court Health Services. Thank you. Dr. Rachel Castañeda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Reynoso, for that introduction, and I'm honored to have worked with you and continue to work with you. And thank you for inviting me to the POC meeting today. I come with over 25 years of working within the space of research to practice efforts, mainly locally in LA County, but statewide in California across the 58 counties, and different states and internationally, all aimed at improving the well-being and the quality of of life of youth in local communities challenged with substance use issues and co-occurring mental health and social needs that stem from my own lived experiences. Just like Dr. Reynoso, I have a family history of addiction and mental illness, and so that's what draws me to this area. Like your sister, my brother overdosed on methamphetamine, which really kind of directed my work in this space. So I'm honored to briefly share an overview, quick overview of some relevant research, some trends, and some best practices to specific to youth substance use. And so what I mean by youth is adolescent. All around system improvement that might be helpful to the POC efforts in some way in the future to potentially helping inform them, as was mentioned. Next slide, please. So we live in as you can see here on the left-hand side, a bunch of statistics that really just shapes how we should be understanding substance use. In that societally, we live in a drug-oriented place. So these epidemiological statistics show that drug and alcohol use, misuse, and disorders are major public health challenges that affect millions. And they place enormous burden on systems and settings, especially when left unaddressed or not adequately addressed from a quality standpoint. There's serious concerns in particular for youth populations, as you see on the right-hand side in the box, as neuroscience research supports that clinically, pathology of substance use, what we call addiction, is an adolescent onset disorder. So my work hones in on best practice research specific to understanding substance use from a public health perspective, really kind of shifting around understanding risk perspective, risk models. Next slide, please. So what are the risk factors? And so if we are going to start with a public health model, we should look more expansively. And so this is the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and they do a lot of epidemiological surveillance work around tracking risk data specific to youth in community settings. And they've established this kind of statement that young people under the age of 25 are deemed an at-risk population for engaging in what we call health risk behaviors. And you see them here on the right-hand side. They're a variety of health behaviors, including safety behaviors, sexual behaviors, dietary behaviors, physical activity behaviors. Screen time has gotten added to the list, and substance use, tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs. So this research from the CDC is super important for considering it because it helps us shift attention away from understanding substance use as a moral, behavioral kind of issue to a developmental public health problem. Next slide, please. So to show this, just really quickly, we can look at the extent to which youth follow national health standards across these behavioral areas that are specific to all promoting positive health outcomes like protective factors. And so you see here, there's all kinds of guidelines. And next slide, please. When we ask the question, do youth adhere to these guidelines on the left-hand side, I just summarized them around diet, like healthy plate, screen time, limiting to 2 to 4 hours per day, sleep guidelines, getting 8 to 10 hours per night, physical activity guidelines, which is getting 60 minutes of daily activity per day, anaerobic, aerobic, strength, muscling, bone conditioning, they add those nuances, and then safety, like helmet use when they're skateboarding or bike riding. We know from the data that the CDC collects through that survey is that mostly youth are not following these health standards. They eat what they want. They're on screens excessively. They pull all-nighters. They don't have they don't get the adequate amount of sleep. They don't go out to exercise per guidelines. They ditch helmet laws when skateboarding or biking. And next click, they don't pay attention to substance use laws either, by the way. Next click. So there's a lot of risk, there's underage drinking, substance use. They don't listen to don't drink and drive, all of these laws, and why. And it's critical for us to understand this from a developmental perspective. Next slide, please. So research strongly supports this, like from a public health model. In order to understand substance use, we got to start with developmental risks. And the research all points to the developing brain. And you see the brain there, it's changing color. And that pretty much just means that the brain is maturing and it doesn't reach full maturation until the age of 25. You can click there. What this means on the right-hand side, you can see that primarily what's operating from a youth from the age of 12 to 25 is all driven, their actions are all driven by emotions, right? And less so their cognitive, their like judgment. That's because the last part of the brain to fully develop is the prefrontal cortex that controls those executive functions around, should I consider consequences? Should I use judgment? And right, what's kind of on full throttle is next, you can click, excitement, arousal, novelty, right? So with a developing brain, young people are more likely to have preference for rewarding activities, social activities, things they see, right, in their communities, things they see in the radio, in film, in media, what's available, what's accessible and looks exciting. If we think about the media, for example, it portrays substance use as positive, as fun, normal, not harmful, right? And so next slide. So there's this maturation gap in brain systems as the way we really need to understand youth and youth development and risk towards substance use and all sorts of other health behaviors of why they're not eating right, adhering to the recommendations, why they're not sleeping according to standards, why they're not going outside to get physical activity, and why they're using alcohol and drugs, right, from an experimental standpoint, is because of the underdeveloped brain phenomena. From a poll, though, if you see this and you read it on which, you think about which right or privilege matches brain development, age 25, we see even quite blatantly that society doesn't operate under a developmental model. Neither do our systems, right, that we're talking about. So from the list here, A through E, the one right or privilege that does match brain maturation, if you can guess it, is, next, you can click, renting a car, right? Next slide. Research points out that although substance use, that although there is this risk taking, you see it here on this continuum, it's important to recognize that there is a continuum and that all substance use is the same. And there is this developmental risk. What that means is all youth, it doesn't matter who they are they're prone to use alcohol and drugs. And it's experimentation and it's recreation. And there is aspects of fitting in with society that tend to kind of move towards across this continuum from social use, binge use, misuse, right? But we're considering, and the research I do is looking at what you can click, what poses risk from moving a youth to the more substance use disorder category. You can click. Thank you. So what moves young people from just this developmental risk to substance use disorder pathology? Next slide, or we can click. So that's a question for all of you to wonder about, right? So what is the predictive risk factors for moving youth towards a substance use disorder? Is it stuck?
Is the slideshow stuck, Jennifer?
She's having some connection issues. Are you able to proceed without the presentation for now?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And so, just as Commissioner Jackson indicated, volumes of research indicate that you can know somebody's health pretty much by their zip code or family dynamics, what we call, ecological kind of determinants of health. And we know that health starts where youth live, learn, and play. So the strongest predictors by far that research has shown that are associated with moving young people across that continuum towards trajectories of pathology or what we call addiction is not behavior, right? It's not that developmental behavior. It's really the social and the physical ecological conditions that youth are exposed to, specifically exposure to household and community dysfunction, what we call trauma or adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and social agents. So you can click specific to substance use, what I talked about earlier, access, like you can't walk down the street in a community without seeing a smoke shop, a dispensary, a liquor store, right? Availability through policies. We just passed in California cannabis for recreation, peer pressure, gang involvement, and media exposures. You look at top charts of music and instances in which substances are mentioned, it's averages like 4 references, right? Top hits and all sorts of genres. If you look at film, top film on box office hits, right? Substance use depictions are common. Billboards, drive a freeway, it's celebrate. It's all positive, and which this exposure over time manifests into what's referenced as kind of allostatic load of indirect socialization and stressors from these adverse environments. And a lot of research, I know the group I work with at UCLA looks at syndemics, and this is the phenomena of how chronic stress triggers these kind of an exposure to these trauma and environmental conditions will trigger the onset of conditions, right? Behavioral, continued the behavior issues, and then chronic health conditions, and they're synergistically affect each other. So co-occurring mental health will affect co-occurring substance use disorders, will affect co-occurring physical health risks, so on and so forth, making each condition worse and leading to poor things like what we see youth manifest as poor compliance or poor adherence or poor engagement or poor participation, right? It really has to do with these syndemic and these impacts that are happening behind the scenes. Next slide, please. So this chart just shows that. Thank you. If you go back to the chart, it just shows that across the board. The research on the left-hand side, we don't like to isolate substance use from a public health developmental model. When you start to look at all behaviors, delinquency, teen pregnancy, school dropout, violence, depression, all of the risk factors really point to these agents around social and ecological causes that work synergistically. Next slide. So the current work I do, and fun to see Liz from SAPSI here, is I do a lot of work with system improvement efforts that serve youth with co-occurring risks and issues to ensure best practices and models are used. So I do workforce development, a lot of training around providers and workforce capacity, like with Dr. Reynoso and the DMH work we've done there, but also just looking at system issues. So around like, are the systems using the science, like what I just presented to you? Like, or are they using their own kind of old models and how they feel things should go from a quality standpoint? And so I work with a group called and SAPSI and others are in the county, in LA County, are involved with this group. It's funded by the California Community Foundation, CCF. It's called the Youth Service Policy Group. And it's a collection of providers under the specialty system of substance use disorder on the right-hand side, and then how it works with community settings, linkages, because we know that youth with substance use issues have a lot of need for care coordination and linkages. So this group in particular is working on outlining priority areas that address system and structural inadequacies, that address inequitable service delivery, right? That parity with mental health, like how come we have physical health, but substance use is treated very differently in different systems, like in schools or maybe justice systems or healthcare, mental health. Inaccessible care, issues with access to the full continuum and services, right? And so priority has been given around efforts in this group around substance use prevention in the schools, for example. I'll just give you an example of, you mentioned earlier, some bills. And right now, this group is supporting AB 599. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but it's supporting the revision of school suspension and expulsion policies for drug-related infractions to create policies that really use public health approaches and shift away from punitive efforts. So public health approaches, next slide, would be focused on restorative justice. And what the, you can click again, what the Institute of Medicine focuses in on, like using youth developmental models that are public health focused, because substance use is a public health issue, using trauma-informed models that emphasize safety and support, using strength-based models that kind of hone in on holistic programming, so resiliency building, strengthening families, and then evidence-based for clinical programming, and then community reintegration, right, into if they get expelled, if they get suspended. And so this is access, and then access to services that they otherwise wouldn't have, like vocation, housing support. Next slide. And this all falls under the best practices of the Institute of Medicine, and in terms of what makes a responsive public health system. So it's respecting individuals' values, preferences, and expressed needs, like youth, and you guys mentioned this, like hearing their voice and treating them as human beings. And then integrating coordinated services within systems. So if systems are siloed, then don't stop there. You should work across the system and the county to ensure that they get the services, ensuring that we're responsive, and not all youth are the same in settings and systems. They have different risk needs, and we should be open to tailoring services to their needs. Emphasizing physical comfort, right? We are settings, so we're a business, just like hotels and other restaurants that get graded on service and quality. So should our agencies and systems of care in the county. Providing emotional support and then ongoing inclusion of support systems beyond the traditional family, and including diversity needs. Next slide. Oh, I end. So if there's any questions or comments, some of the current work that I've been doing, and I'm sure Liz will cover, is just workforce preparedness we've been doing with SAPC. So we have worked on an early intervention curriculum that SAPC is using across systems, and it does really hone in on this public health model of shifting attention to substance use as this larger public health phenomena. And then we're working currently with the Department of Healthcare Services in California, UCLA, and a group I work with at ISAP, the Integrated Substance Abuse Programs, on our evidence-based practice registry for the state, because the federal government under SAMHSA kind of cut the national evidence-based program registry, and so each state is now working on their own. And so I'm part of an effort around substance use prevention best practices that just kind of starts there, but we'll go into the treatment and recovery space to ensure quality services and keep systems accountable. I'll end there, and if there's any questions or comments. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you so much. Dr. Reynoso, do we have other presenters on this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair Jackson. Next, we will hear from the Department of Mental Health, Dr. Streich and Dr. Demerla, who will provide a brief overview of the treatment or programs currently offered to youth in juvenile justice. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Karen Streich, and this is Dr. Hanu Demerla, who's the Medical Director for Juvenile Justice. And thank you for the opportunity to come and share about what services we provide within the halls and camps to youth. We have a very comprehensive, actually, assessment process that happens for every single youth that comes into the system. So each youth is assessed by a mental health professional, and a complete assessment regarding all their psychosocial. We do a full juvenile justice assessment on each youth, also a full substance use assessment, and we also call the parents and do a questionnaire regarding the youth substance use, from the parents' perspective. Often very different story. So basically, if you don't identify a problem, you can't provide any support to the youth. So I think that coming into the juvenile hall, we want to make sure that we identify the needs of the youth so that we can meet their needs, while at least during the time that they're in custody, and then to properly link them when they leave the system. So from a mental health perspective, we find that many of these youth have both a mental health issue and a substance use issue. In fact, it's often hard to tell which drives the other, but we do know that the mental health problem punctuates the substance use issues and vice versa. So each youth is, I said, assessed, and we do provide a treatment plan for the youth that with their, obviously their buy-in on what kind of issues and concerns they want to work on. And we, depending upon the length of stay, obviously the hall is much shorter. The camps, we've developed some pretty comprehensive programs for the youth in the camp because they stay a lot longer. But we provide, in the juvenile halls, we provide an evidence-based intervention called Seeking Safety, which we have found can be used both individually and as a group. The best part about this intervention is often the driver of substance use, as you've heard through the prior presentation, is an exposure to trauma. And this intervention specifically addresses the complex interaction of trauma, substance use, and mental health issues. So that's delivered by our clinicians. We do have Department of Mental Health substance abuse counselors that work for the Department of Mental Health and provide treatment. We have a 10 and a 5-week program in the camps, which is based on the SAMHSA motivational interviewing and the SAMHSA model. That we have actually done some pre-post tests. Erica probably still has a headache from those pre-post, looking at whether or not it's actually doing what we hope that it would do. And lastly, we have, because in the camps we do a lot of DBT, we have mindfulness-based substance abuse interventions delivered by our clinicians. So that's just a quick overview from my perspective, and I'm going to ask Dr. DeMarla to chime in here from from his perspective as the medical director.
Thank you so much, Dr. Streich. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Erica, Dr. Reynoso, and for having us and the commission. So I'm Hanu DeMarla. I'm a child analyst and forensic psychiatrist. I'm also board certified in addiction medicine, and I'm the medical director for Juvenile Justice Mental Health Program for DMH. And I agree with Dr. Streich's comprehensive summary as to how the assessment goes on. And honestly, the comorbidity is the rule in this population, especially not just in juvenile justice population, but in child analysis and psychiatry in general. So you do have to treat both mental health, mental illness diagnoses, as well as substance use. One without the other does not yield good results. So to that end, I think the primary treatments are non-pharmacological, essentially, because like Dr. Streich was saying, seeking safety in the halls and also addressing the trauma. And then in the camps, we have a combo of motivation interviewing along with cognitive behavioral therapy. But there's also a population, there is a subset, a population, a small fraction that require more than just non-pharmacological treatment. And that is, evidence is showing that MAT, or medication-assisted treatment, which Dr. Castaneda alluded to in her presentation, has a significant role in some instances. It's not meant that all the youth require it. It's mainly, it references mainly the opioid use disorder. And to that extent, I'm happy to say that we are closely collaborating with the Juvenile Court Health Services, Dr. O, and his team of pediatricians. So DMH psychiatrists, DMH teams, and JCHS are closely collaborating. We're in the process of discussing developing parameters for this MAT, which is something that is evolving as a science as far as treatment analysis goes. So our psychiatrists, as well as pediatricians, I'm happy to say that we have the ability to implement MAT in our halls and camps. And so, for example, use of many of you have heard the use of Suboxone in certain situations, in, for example, opioid use disorder or naltrexone. Just to give you a couple of examples. To that end, I think we are equipped, and our psychiatrists are very qualified, and they perform thorough evaluations. And this is something that we take very seriously. Like I said, MAT is, we are equipped to do MAT, and it's available because of the professional expertise we have from our physicians, both psychiatrists and pediatricians. And I know naloxone is a very important component. Once again, Dr. Castaneda alluded to that, and because it can be life-saving in many instances. And I know that there is many of our camp staff have already been trained, and plans are on their way for also the Detention Services Bureau staff to be trained in that regard and to procure naloxone. But I think Dr. O has a better handle on that, and with regards to the naloxone distribution at the state level, and maybe I'll request him to chime in on that piece and add anything else that he may want to. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. David O, for the Medical Director for Juvenile Court Health Services. And as Dr. Miller said, we have had the opportunity to be able to have this life-saving treatment available for those who had taken opioids. And if they've been in a situation where they have taken too much and has had symptoms of opioid overdose, there is a life-saving medication called naloxone, which is available. We've had it available for our medical staff, but in order to be most effective, it's best to get the treatment available to the youth right away. So we've worked with probation and have been able to procure supply from the state naloxone distribution program. And we've gotten a supply for the probation staff within the facilities themselves too. So not only is the supply important, but also the training. So we've trained worked with the RTSB staff and have trained the camp staff to be able to recognize and to be able to administer the medication. So they have a supply on hand on them, also available within the facility itself. And in the process also of training the DSB staff as well. The DSB staff is being trained with the help of a state program that is on a train-the-trainer basis. So because the number of DSB staff is a lot higher, we've utilized that method of training to be able to reach out to those in the juvenile halls. So as the process goes where they get trained, they'll be able to carry the naloxone or the Narcan on them, on the person, and to be able to have that medication more readily available to youth as if symptoms do arise, that they'd be able to give to them.
Thank you, Dr. O, and thank you, DMH partners. Chair Jackson, if it's okay to move on to our next presenter at this time.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. So next we'll be hearing from Dr. Elizabeth Norris Walzak, who will provide a brief overview of their role and what they do or current or future partnerships that they expect with DMH or probation. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Norris Walzak with DPH SAPC, so that's Substance Abuse Prevention and Control and Department of Public Health. And I'm going to be talking to you all today a little bit about the services that we have available both in the community and in custody settings, and also for probation youth, as well as services that are in the works at this point. So next slide, please. So SAPC is the Specialty Substance Use Disorder System of Care for LA County. And we are committed to reducing the impact of substance use, abuse, and addiction in LA County. We lead and facilitate the delivery of a full spectrum of prevention, treatment, and recovery support services throughout LA County. We also maintain a network of contracted agencies that provide easily accessible, effective, and patient-centered services. And we have over 100 contracted providers in over 350 locations throughout LA County. Next slide, please. So at SAPC And I think, you know, across the county network, we believe in a no wrong door approach to accessing SED treatment. So these are a variety of different pathways to accessing SED treatment in the community. So one is our substance abuse service hotline. The number is here that you can reference for future reference. That's available to anyone to call to make linkages into services, and they do screenings and warm handoffs while the patient is on the line into SED treatment services at the appropriate level. We also have the Connecting to Opportunities for Recovery and Engagement, or CORE centers, which are brick and mortar sites that offer SED information, screening, referral, and other services in public health centers. We also have, as probably many of you are familiar with, the Service and Bed Availability Tool, which is an online provider directory that you can use to filter based on what type of service is needed. For example, you can filter by youth provider, agency, you can filter by geographic area, and a variety of other filtering options, level of care, and so forth. And then we also have recoverla.org, which is a mobile-friendly app with information about services that are available through SBAT and other SED information. And in addition, we have the Client Engagement and Navigation Services, or what we call CENS, which are co-locations that we have developed in partnership with many other agencies across LA County. And we'll talk about a little bit more about those in terms of the services that we provide currently in the juvenile halls. Next slide, please. So this is SED Youth Provider Network at a glance. At this point, SAPC has 28 youth contracted providers. They are located in 42 outpatient sites across LA County, 34 intensive outpatient sites. We have one residential provider if youth need access to that level of care that has 38 beds. And we also provide field-based services in lots of different sites across LA County for youth that are harder to reach, such as short-term residential therapeutic programs, schools, and other sites. Next slide, please. So we have a whole spectrum of services that are available across our network, and most of the services are available for youth too, starting with outpatient services, intensive outpatient services, which, as it sounds, is just more hours of outpatient services that are provided in outpatient settings. Residential services for youth, there are two different levels of residential care. A lower intensity and a high intensity, depending on their needs. We offer withdrawal management services. We have MAT services that are available through opioid treatment programs and other providers. We also have Recovery Bridge Housing, which is sober living for individuals who are in outpatient services. So that's really for adults, young adults and adults. And then recovery services that are provided to folks who have completed their treatment or who need additional support. For youth and young adults, we also have early intervention services, which we implemented earlier this year. So those services, you know, we can talk about in more detail at a later point, but essentially it opens up services to people who do not, who are at risk for SUD, but do not meet medical necessity for a substance use disorder. And in all of our treatment settings, the interventions include one-on-one counseling, group counseling, family therapy, medication for addiction treatment. We also have case management, care coordination, and service linkages into other services like to our mental health partners. Next slide, please. So we recently created a juvenile justice unit here at SAPC to really focus on providing services in custody. At this point in time, we have client engagement and navigation services, or CEN services, already available at both juvenile halls. And these are to facilitate access to SED screenings and post-release linkages to community SED services that I was just talking about previously for youth and young adults who are residing in the juvenile halls. The types of services that are currently provided include SED screening and referrals to treatment, client outreach and engagement, client eligibility and enrollment, care coordination, and they also are able to provide services, early intervention services, using the early intervention curriculum that was developed with the Azusa Pacific team led by Rachel Castaneda, whom we just heard from earlier. So next slide, please. So we're also working on expanding the services that we're providing in the halls and in the camps. We are working right now on the implementation of full SED treatment continuum in response to the closure of California's Division of Juvenile Justice. So this will facilitate access to SED, full spectrum of SED treatment services, not just screenings and referrals and early intervention services, but the full spectrum among youth and young adults who are transitioning from DJJ and new post-disposition youth and young adults housed in board-identified secure youth treatment facilities. So the locations are listed here, and our anticipated rollout for these services is this spring. Next slide, please. And as well, we are working on building out our full spectrum of SED treatment services for the general juvenile population via a competitive bidding process. So that will facilitate access to the full spectrum of SED treatment services that I talked about that are available in the community at this point for pre and post dispositioned youth and young adults within the juvenile justice system. And the locations for that will include the halls as well as these facilities that are listed here. So the various camps. And the anticipated rollout for that is winter of 2023. Next slide, please. So if you have any questions or you would like to follow up with us for more information, you can contact our branch chief for System of Care, which is the treatment component of SAPC, who is Inera Lima, whose email is listed here. I'm Liz Norris. My email is also listed here. And Valerie Squentes, who is our unit manager for the Juvenile Justice Unit, who is also on the call today, is really the point person for all things juvenile justice at DPH SAPC. So thank you again for inviting us to participate in the panel today, and we look forward to continuing collaboration.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you so much.
Norris. Chair Jackson, that concludes our presentations. Back to you.
Great, thank you so much for that very comprehensive presentation on this item. Let's move on to public comment.
Thanks, Chair Jackson. If you would like to make public comment, please raise your hand using the little raise your hand function at the bottom of the screen or dialing *3. If you can't figure it out, send Janae a chat in the chat box. But please don't put your public comment in the chat. I don't see any hands.
All right, commissioners, do you have any comments or questions on this item? I would like to remind you that we're going to be having a symposium on this item, and so we obviously welcome discussion here, but it is a very dense topic that's going to require deeper discussion, and you can save your comments for that forum as well. I don't see any hands up so far, but while we wait for public comment and perhaps from hands from the commissioners, I would say that after hearing that presentation, it kind of confirms this idea that an idle mind is a devil's playground, right? Where you see these youth who are largely unoccupied, unsupported, and uninspired maybe too, that they're partaking in really risky behavior. And so that was the sort of correlation that I was seeing, which is why it's really, really important that we're having these conversations about the types of programs and services that should be offered on an ongoing basis outside of DMH, outside of all of those things that we're discussing here today. I'm not seeing any hands. Great, Commissioner Carrillo.
Thank you, Chair. That was a great presentation, and I'm just wondering, what's your relationship with the probation department about getting your folks in and these programs and accessing to the youth? And anyone can answer this. It's just curious about all these amazing things that are available, but you still have a gatekeeper. And I would love to know just how the process is going.
Commissioner Carrillo, who are you directing that question to? Any of the presenters?
Any presenter other than our host, Erica, who I mean, she has some answers, but I don't want to hear it from her. Just
Sure.
someone about just telling us, you know, it's about implementation inside the juvenile halls, camps, and potentially SYTF.
I can just speak from our perspective. So
Yeah.
we have mental health clinicians inside the facilities in each of the living units, and we've had cooperation in giving us office space and kind of facilitating the work that we do. So we have not had any issues, you know, getting our clinicians in to be able to do the work at this point. So I don't know if that addressed your question, but from our perspective, we're in the facilities 7 days a week, and it's worked for us.
Thank you.
All right, it looks like Miss.
Ms. Cifuentes.
Yes.
Good afternoon. So this is Valerie Cifuentes. So our relationship with probation, we're having ongoing discussions and communications as we're preparing to roll out our services. Of course, the SENS operation has already been in operation. We are currently working on setting up meetings with all of the DSB managers so that we can really kind of educate and let them know what our SENS services are available in the halls. So we're working on setting up that kind of meet and greet to really, you know, make sure that they put a face to the name, they understand SAPC's role and what the SENS offers at the 2 juvenile hall locations. I have been meeting very frequently with the Tri Academy or SYTF group, which includes, you know, the directors as well as all of the community-based organizations, including DMH, you know, the designated staff for DMH for that project as we start to roll out our services. We unfortunately don't have as much access to space. You know, that's something that we are working on to try to get access for our staff to be able to have on site at the various locations. That has been one of the main, you know, challenges that we've identified as we were looking at this whole implementation process. But we are working very closely with probation. We're working with Ms. Jennifer Kaufman on a regular basis to discuss, you know, our whole rollout and implementation plan. So as we're moving everything forward, you know, we have ongoing communication and dialogue with probation quite frequently.
And just for me, Commissioner Carrillo, I would have integration with the symposium that's being planned. And so that would be where I would fit in.
Thank you. You know, just it's curiosity, but it's also just a concern about great folks with great intentions, just not having access to the work that they are intended to or being paid or assigned to do. And I think that, you know, hearing about the space at Kilpatrick, I assume maybe the compound as well, is troubling, because the idea of being there is about programming and giving this population of youth the services that we need. So I'm looking forward to hearing some good news about space being allocated for you guys.
Agreed. Thank you, Commissioner Carrillo. Probation leadership, maybe you can speak on this before we move on. What do you see your role as being in making sure that these programs or services rather can be successfully implemented going forward? And are there any foreseeable challenges? Maybe you can speak to both.
Good afternoon. We truly welcome all of the assistance that we're getting at this time from DMH, and as well working with SAPC and trying to build a more, robust program for substance use. The space is a challenge, and we're aware of that, and we're more than willing to look into and discuss the opportunities to try to provide better space to conduct the substance abuse classes and programming.
What exactly is the issue with space? There's just not enough program space. Is that in the unit? Is it within the facilities at large? Like, can you say more about that?
From SAPC's perspective, when we were initially looking at the facilities and how we would envision these programs and services being delivered, one of the things that we looked at was the space for confidential assessments and screenings. So of course, in the in-custody setting, it is a very huge challenge to have dedicated space, because I do believe that there's some interview rooms that are available in the modules, but a lot of that time it's being occupied or utilized by other entities. So we don't have access to that kind of space, which would be beneficial for us to conduct those confidential assessments. Our SENS providers who are currently on site, some of the challenges they've encountered, and this would be specifically for Barry J, would be that they'd have to maybe conduct an assessment in the hallway or kind of off, to sitting to the side, because there really is no dedicated interview space for us to utilize throughout the day. The other challenge, of course, would be having dedicated office space. We did have one office space available to us at Barry J. However, that was reallocated, and now our SENS provider does not have easy access to on-site computer, phone, all the things that we need to do the day-to-day work for coordinating the reentry linkages for this population. So it has been a little bit of both, whether it's interview space to conduct the interviews, the screenings, office space to actually be able to conduct the work. We haven't gotten to the point yet of doing groups yet at Barry J, but that is going to be a challenge. I know that having group space or space to do groups at Barry J is going to be a challenge. At Central Hall, we've been lucky. We've been able to work and coordinate with LACO, and we've been able to utilize some of their classroom space at the end of the day when they're no longer in school to actually conduct some of our early intervention courses at Central Juvenile Hall. So things have been kind of running more smoothly at Central Juvenile Hall versus at Barry J. So those are some of the things that we're working on, and we've identified where the challenges are, and then we're having these ongoing conversations and dialogues with probation to see how do we rectify this.
Sure. It's kind of hard to believe that, the facilities are short of space, because it feels like during my inspections, there's always vacant units that we can't inspect. And so, Ms. Fletcher, are you able to speak to the issue of capacity when it comes to the space to facilitate or to conduct the confidential meetings?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. So we are working on the space. A lot of our units and buildings are offline, and I know Adam's team has been working really diligently to make improvements to those buildings. And so that's why many of the buildings have been offline. We're making some significant progress in upgrading those units. But we will go back and specifically look at office space, because we know that it's incredibly important for the confidentiality piece of assessments and talking to our young folks. So we'll go back and look at some of those units to see if there's another way that we can carve out space. But again, many of our buildings are offline, but soon to be completed. So I don't know if Adam, you have any updates to that.
Just a couple, as Chief Fletcher mentioned, there's a lot of home-like improvements that are happening. As folks are aware, if you've been in the facilities recently, you've probably seen quite a bit of the work that has been done. We are coordinating with ISD. They've been a really, really great partner in all of this, but we're coordinating to make sure that we're not taking up too much space, to be honest, while we do the renovations. We're ensuring that we are moving quickly through the facilities to upgrade as much as we can, but we also are trying to be mindful that we're not taking up too much space. And I agree. I think this is something that's come up just around programming space in general. There's some other ideas that we have that we're kind of kicking around, but to see what other areas may not be totally utilized all the time, and see if we can make use of that space as well.
I hear you. Thank you. Let's have Commissioner Meredith speak so that we can move things along. But you should note that we would like to hear back on that probably at some point between now and when we do that symposium soon, as there be some real actionable things being discussed there. Commissioner Meredith?
Mine might be a little bit complex. I got like 3 questions here. The first is, when you're walking around, do you realize, or do you recognize anybody under the influence in the facility? And if so, how do you handle that? I guess that's to the medical team.
I mean, at the time that a youth seems to be under the influence, it would be somebody that would contact either the medical staff, or if it's something that needs to be attention right away, and it seems like they are in need of naloxone, probation staff has access to. But usually what happens is they would contact the medical staff and we would go out there and do an assessment. And if need be, naloxone, depending on what the symptoms they have, proceed with whatever treatment is necessary.
Okay, and then this is probably more for probation. You know, in my inspections, I've observed people under the influence when I've been in there, which is a significant problem. But more importantly, I've heard from staff that there's been some ODs. If so, how has that been handled? And also, have we had any Narcan deployments, if you will?
Thank you, Commissioner Meredith. We're not aware of any ODs. We have Narcan on site. We have not had to use it on any of our population to date.
Thank you.
Is that the end of your questions, Commissioner Meredith? Okay, great. Commissioner Carrillo, I see you attempting to raise your hand. Do you have any final thoughts before we move on to the next agenda item?
Thank you, Chair Jackson. I'll wait to the symposium. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for this discussion, everyone. We're moving on to agenda item number 5, where we discuss and take any necessary action on the Probation Oversight Commission's response to the LA Times newspaper article published on February 11th, where there was a reporting of a disturbing video showing excessive use of force by a teenager in a unit. A link to the article is attached to the agenda, so hopefully you've had time to see that. If not, we are going to share that video during today's meeting in just a couple of minutes. I will say that you might find this video difficult to watch, so consider this a trigger warning. We are going to give you just a few moments right now to minimize your screen and mute your speakers if you prefer not to see it. The video is about 2 minutes and 40 seconds long, and we'll resume the meeting in 3 minutes after it's complete. But I will say first, I believe Commissioner Gonzales would like to chime in with remarks before we play that video.
Yes, thank you very much, Commissioner Jackson. I just want to say, I want to take full responsibility. First of all, if there's outrage from the community or people are upset that we're showing this video that was already featured in the LA Times, because it is very traumatizing to watch. And, I thought about this when I presented this to our chair. And the reason is, when I was in prison at 18 years old, the very first time I went to prison, I was advised, by my mentors at that time that to put away my pictures and, don't think about it, put away your pictures. This is how you have to do your time. And I took that advice. And, every once in a while, I would pull those pictures out because I constantly heard from my loved ones that were out, and I would pull those pictures out. And I would allow myself to look at them. But when I would allow myself to look at them, it would hurt. It was troubling. I didn't want to look at them. And so I did find that the easy way to do this time was to keep those pictures in an envelope. And, I was looking at this video and hearing so many comments from people saying, I don't want to see it. I refuse to watch it. And I thought, what a privilege we have that we can choose what triggers us and what traumatizes us. But yet there's people inside that do not have that luxury. There's people inside that do not have that privilege to say, I don't want to see this today. I don't want to live this today. That includes youth and probation staff that are working alongside these probation officers. And so I felt it was important for those. If you're a youth and have been through this, please do not watch it. I'm not, to take that into consideration. I also reached out to a longtime youth advocate and community healer that is on the crawl right now. Her contact information has been dropped in the chat, Kruti. She is also available if you feel that you need to speak to a healer, or she can even put together a healing space for you. And she has her contact information is in the chat. And so I do understand also if there is outrage from the community, and I will accept full responsibility. Please do not take it out on the other commissioners. Take it out on me in whatever way you feel necessary. But I feel that it's necessary, that this is their truth and their life, and it hurts to look at it. It's troubling to look at it, but I refuse to keep my pictures in an envelope any longer. And this is their life. Thank you.
I do join Commissioner Canales in apologizing if this content has triggered any of our viewers in any way, but I do believe that it's equally our responsibility to call things out as we see them. And so it feels very appropriate for us to share that in this meeting before we discuss this item. You see the situation escalate from 10 to 100 in seconds, really. And it's easy to watch this video and be outraged by what seems preventable. And that's whether you're watching as a staff member, as a commissioner, as a mother, as a member of the public. And so the Probation Oversight Commission drafted a statement to express our position and to hopefully frame next steps on this. And in case you haven't had the opportunity to read our statement, I'd like to take a moment to read that now. The Probation Oversight Commission is deeply disturbed by the contents of the LA Times article and accompanying video published on February 11th, showing a disturbing use of force incident on a youth at Campus Kilpatrick at the hands of a probation supervisor still working at the department. We emphatically impose the infliction of additional trauma on youth inside probation facilities by probation staff. The incident at Campus Kilpatrick highlights the need for trauma-informed therapeutic programming performed by highly trained staff inside probation facilities. It is imperative that probation staff receive training by experts in de-escalation and restorative justice measures and actually implement those strategies in the facilities and maintain their employment only if they're able to do so. The probation department needs transformative culture change, one where officers believe in rehabilitative and trauma-informed practices and will intervene to stop fellow officers from escalating situations or when a fellow colleague is engaging in prohibited or morally reprehensible conduct. From the oversight perspective, the incident at Campus Kilpatrick reveals the need for accountability measures that go far deeper than those currently in practice. Probation must be compelled to share critical incidents with the Board of Supervisors, the POC, and the OIG to shed light on the problems and address them with integrity and responsibility. We need CCTV in all facilities, and oversight bodies should be able to review footage of critical incidents expeditiously. The county should consider sharing video of serious incidents with the family of youth subjected to excessive use of violence as additional means of oversight. This would help ensure that the treatment of youth in custody is fair and, more importantly, lawful. Regarding personnel and discipline, we call for fair and consistent progressive discipline up to and including termination of employees who do not comply with the county's core values. An unbiased review of use of force by an outside body such as OIG is instrumental in this process. As an accountability measure, we need quarterly reports regarding the result of internal affairs and use of force investigations, especially those especially in cases where the chief declines a recommendation to terminate. Lastly, to protect youth, there needs to be an advocate, such as a member of the defense bar or a family member in the review process. We affirm our commitment to centering the well-being and protection of youth and adults in probation custody and all issues brought to and acted upon by the Probation Oversight Commission. We are dedicated to our role in helping shape the department, driven by good service and healthy outcomes for all stakeholders involved. And that concludes this statement. I'd like to just add before we move on to public comment that you can expect an update on the action taken on this matter by the POC once more information is gathered on the investigation of the issue, and as we meet with probation leadership with deeper insight and a plan on what should take place in response to this. I'd like to move on to public comment. Wendy, can you facilitate?
Yes, thank you, Chair Jackson. We're going to start with Aditi Shirakar. Aditi, give us a second to put the clock up and we'll unmute you and I'll let you know. You can begin.
Shirakar, Children's Defense Fund, California. I want to start by just talking about the POC statement, which frankly is not going far enough and falls really flat for me because we are so far beyond any calls for training or de-escalation or reform. You just heard a young man yell for his mother in pain after being subjected to horrendous abuse at Campus Kilpatrick, which is held up as the gold standard for trauma-informed therapeutic environment. And this is where this incident happened. So it just makes no sense that we would at this point say, you know, we need trauma-informed therapeutic programming performed by highly trained staff, because that is exactly what Campus Kilpatrick is held up to be. And if it can happen there, imagine how much worse it is in places like Barry J or Central. And I want to talk a little bit about this need for restorative justice. I just don't understand what that means in this context. This was a young person who was hungry and who threw a milk carton in frustration. So who exactly is this restorative justice for? The adults in the room that were supposed to feed him and keep him safe and instead ended up physically assaulting him? It doesn't make any sense. This statement does not fit what we all just watched and listened to on our screens. Something much, much more transformative is needed. I think it's very clear that this is not a department that can be reformed. This is not a department that you can train to not abuse kids. It's in their DNA. It's what they're doing. It's what this department is built on. So stop calling for weak things like training and de-escalation and restorative justice, which doesn't even make sense in this context, and start dismantling LA County probation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Heather Moore. Heather, give me 1 second. Heather, you can begin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Heather Moore. I'm on behalf of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. I am a formerly incarcerated individual that has had the experience also in foster youth. I've been impacted by the system in all ways, shapes, and forms. So you want to talk about dismantling the probation department. Probation is put in place for transition purpose, you know, like also for consequences to make sure that we're acting like we should, you know. The thing is it's the employees. These people, the employees are not being screened and they're not being held responsible for their poor choices that they're making. They're taking advantage of their authority, which is so unprofessional. You guys are paying so much money for these professionals to act like kids are, and it's sad. I do believe that there should be professional de-escalation. I think it's good for training, but I mean, it has to be done by professionals. There should be more consequences on the people with authority that are working in these facilities that are taking advantage of their authority because they are held to a higher standard. You see, people aren't scared to be acting a nut, or, you know, and abusing their power when there's no consequences behind it, you know, like they can still get a job, you know, like but there's no responsibility that they have to be held accountable for. And I think that's part of the reason why so many people are doing it, you know, and it is what it is, you know.
Thank you, Heather. Comment. Next, we're going to go to Kent Mendoza. Janae, can you let me know when you have Kent unmuted? And also, we do have one written comment that was submitted before the meeting that was shared with commissioners and will be attached to the agenda. Kent, you can begin. Kent, are you there? You show up as unmuted on my side, but we can't hear you. If you're on your phone and you want to dial *6, see if that works. I'm going to mute you, Kent, and we'll come back to you and see if we can figure it out. Let's go to Yvette Alain. Yvette, you are unmuted. You can begin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. Yvette Ale for Lido, Executive Director of La Defensa. I just want to start off by saying how appalled I am, and yet not surprised. This body, year after year, is aware of the harms that are happening to our young people and has failed to take bold action and simply tinkered around the edges. I disagree with the commission's statement that we need to transform the probation department. There is no transformation for a department that tortures children. And while every one of those probation officers should be fired, as well as the probation chief, in fact, for his failure to take appropriate action, holding these individuals accountable and leaning into this narrative that there are just some bad apples detracts from the problem that the department itself cannot be reformed. Young people must be removed from probation custody. There is no reforming this department. We know that there are probably hundreds of young people that simply haven't been captured on camera or leaked when they have been harmed by probation officers. Given what was shared earlier in the meeting, that there are about 50 reports happening a month, and given what other commissioners shared from their personal experience, that this is probably vastly underreported, we can safely say that this is endemic to the department, and that this issue is probably far, far further reaching than we are even aware of. We are subjecting these young people to child abuse without any accountability. If this was a parent, you better believe that the state would have already removed the children. How can we possibly put our young people, the young people that are most vulnerable in our communities, in the hands of a department that will torture and abuse them, that will not feed them properly, that will not give them basic things like clean water? I am disgusted, and I hope this commission takes bold action today.
Thank you, Yvette. Next up, we have James Maddox. James, give me a second here.
And just as a reminder for our public commenters, you have to accept the unmute request and begin with your comment. Thank you.
Okay, James, we show you as unmuted on our side.
Terrific, thank you. Just two questions. One, will you supply all of the names of the commissioners who supported the letter that was being shared? It would be nice to know that. The second is that in the literature and in a book that was just published, one of the problems with policing is that they constantly keep repeating the same thing. In that video, count the number of times you heard them say to this child, and I'm suspecting he's a child, stop resisting, stop resisting, stop resisting. And that confirms their behavior. You can take a look at the literature about that. The other thing that is also troubling is that we don't seem to recognize that the brain, as one of the doctors said, the brain is not developing. We are talking about children whose brains are developing. And if you took a look at that, the only place that your brain development was compatible with your behavior was with renting a car, not in the military. That's why they love nice young flat bodies as 11 Bravos, which is an infantryman in the military. It's disturbing, but as I have said on many occasions, a $1.025 billion operation needs to be shut down, and the responsibilities can be shared or given to someone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Jackson, with your permission, I'd just like to clarify Mr. Maddox's question about the statement being on the agenda for a vote for the commissioners today. So it is being presented for public comment, discussion, and a vote today. Has not yet been accepted. We'll go next to Kent Mendoza. We're going to try this again and see if we can make it work. Kent, you are unmuted on our side. I don't know what's going on with the audio. Kent, maybe, I think there's a way that the system can call you if Janae can communicate with you in the chat. And we'll go next to Brianna. Brianna, you're not unmuted yet, so give me a second. Okay, now you are. You can begin.
Number 5, echoing what others have said, reform is no longer the path for such a violent and harmful system. After seeing the horrific video of 5 probation officers abusing a young person, I am here to call for the immediate resignation of Chief Gonzales for allowing child abuse to occur, and also for the termination of all of the officers who are violently pinning the young teen and using their body weight to harm him as he cried out for his mother. This is a disgusting violation and should be handled swiftly. We must seek to dismantle probation and seek care first alternatives to help out impacted populations. I hold the rest of my time and hope to give you guys a minute and 28 seconds to think about how that poor boy was yelling out against grown adults abusing him for only throwing some milk.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go on next to Thomas. Thomas, you're unmuted and you can begin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, I've already seen that video, and honestly, sometimes I feel like people enjoy this type of stuff. You know, I know it sounds weird, but it people use it as another way of, okay, well, now I get to trash probation again. What do you guys think a restraint is? It's hands-on. It's not a one-on-one. You're not going to get one officer to do it. That's a fight. Restraint, it's hands-on. Okay, if a kid is fighting, which he was kicking and everything in the video, I'm not saying everything was done right, but if a kid is kicking and doing all this stuff in the video, yeah, it's going to take more than one officer. Okay, now if you guys talk to the kid afterwards and saw that he actually was not hurt, he was not injured, it's a different story. But what do you think a restraint is? When you're taking away our tools, when you take away any type of other consequences, and something happens, we have to go hands-on. It doesn't look pretty, doesn't feel pretty, not something we want to do, but that's the situation your policies put us in. Take some responsibility as well. You know what I'm saying? Well, once again, I'm not saying that everything was done right in the video. You know, I'm pretty sure we all see what was done wrong. And I feel like our chief, he gave discipline. For a group that's supposed to be all about second chances and not always being about consequences or rehabilitation, all of a sudden we do something wrong that's off with his head, crucify him. Why is that? Why some people get second chances? Why some people get a chance to rehabilitate, but we don't? He was disciplined, and the chief did a good job, I would say.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Ambrose. Janae, can you let me know when Ambrose is unmuted? There we go. Okay, you can begin. Ambrose, can you try again?
Hi, can you hear me?
Now we can. Thank you. You can begin.
Yes. Hi, my name is Ambrose Brooks. I'm the campaign coordinator at Dignity and Power Now, and I am disgusted by what I have just seen on the video. What will it take to end the probation department's abuse of young people? This video shows something we all already know. The probation department harms our youth and needs to be removed from youth supervision entirely. I believe this commission should recommend the immediate firing of all probation officers involved in the incident and demand the resignation of Chief Gonzales. I also want to draw attention to the fact that the probation department claims that it's about youth rehabilitation. Where is the rehabilitation on that video? Where can we see the probation department officers investing in the future of the youth of LA County? What we've seen time and time again is that they actually don't care. There is no investment in the youth of LA County by the probation department. So why is it that this commission, as well as LA County, continues to shovel billions of dollars into a department that consistently abuses our youth? 50 complaints a month. That is more than one report a day. That is absurd. Something needs to be done. Something radical needs to be done now. We need to remove probation from youth supervision, period. What we just saw was violent abuse of a child. As Yvette LA stated, if that had happened involving parents, you know the county would be there snatching that kid out of the parent's home. Get probation department out of youth supervision. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambrose. Next up, we have Gloria Gonzales. Gloria, don't start talking yet. Wait for me to unmute you for a second. Okay. Oh, nope. Sorry. If you're a call-in user who just raised your hand, can you do it again, please, and dial *3? I saw your number pop up and then it went away. Gloria, you can begin with your 2 minutes now.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. One, I think I would really just like to state that there needs to be no more funding redirected. I mean, sorry, not redirected, but given to probation. also, right, as the Probation Oversight Commission, right, echoing all the comments that came before me, I just want to emphasize that this specific commission was created for an oversight purpose, to be an oversight body. And I really believe through many different actions of the probation department that you all are also allowing all of these things to go on. Just like you all see that video, right? Like if you wouldn't allow your child to be placed in a facility or in a space where that could happen to them, how dare you all continue to allow probation to operate every single day and do these things? Because probation is acting just as it was intended to, right? When we see that there isn't accountability, that the probation officers that were involved in this are not fired, that can't, I mean, how much more louder do you need to see, right, that there isn't any action being taken? Also, right, like as the Probation Oversight Commission, I really urge you all to consider and reconsider the approaches that you are taking, because they are not holding probation accountable. And again, that's the only reason why every single one of you is sitting in that chair, is to figure out, how do you hold this department accountable that acts like if they are not accountable to anyone and do actions that no other person would be allowed to do. If anyone on this that's sitting right now, like if any of you commissioners were to hurt a young person in that way, or even your own children or your own nephew, you would be in jail. We would be incarcerated. If a CBO did this, we would be shut down. Why is this department not shut down as well?
Thank you, Gloria. Next up, we have Titilayo. Unmute you. And you can begin.
Tilaya Rasaki, and I am with La Defensa. As a youth, I was temporarily removed from my family's home for a cry for help and placed in a group home. There is nothing more scary as a child than being taken away from your family and being at the mercy of strangers to take care of you. I was horrified to watch this video. I was horrified to watch 6 adults twist and contort a child's body while yelling at him to stop resisting. Who among you could endure this physiological treatment that we just watched and would not resist and fight for their own lives? This commission's statement was entirely tone deaf. Those officers, as well as Chief Gonzales, must be immediately fired. They were bending his legs and contorting it to his back as though he did not have any bones. I echo other commenters that this entire probation department must be dismantled. Children are not safe in the care of this department. This child was hungry, this child was crying out for his mother, and this was the treatment that he received. No, we are not satisfied with crucifying individuals, because this entire department must be dismantled. This video shows children cannot be in the care of the probation department because we need to build alternatives that actually care for these kids. As others have said, we can only imagine how many unreported incidents where children have been abused by this probation department. This, as others have said, is child abuse. Others would be arrested for this kind of treatment. These officers do not need training. Youth must be removed from the custody of the probation department entirely. This body must take bold action, including the immediate firing of these officers, as well as Chief Gonzales, who failed to immediately fire these abusers. Shame on y'all. And Brianna asked you to pause, and so I'm gonna give you this 15 seconds to actually pause and really think about this. Because if this was your child, what would you do? Shame on y'all.
Thank you. Next up, we have Zoe. Zoe, you're still muted, Zoe, so give us a second. Okay, Zoe, you can begin.
Zoe Rawson, calling from Arts for Healing and Justice Network, LA Youth Uprising Coalition, and in solidarity with young people, families, and communities that are experiencing systemic abuse, systemic trauma, racialized violence. A violent system requires violence to sustain itself. Probation is a violent system. It's built upon violence, and it requires violence to sustain itself. So we're falling way short if we're continuously asking probation to fix itself. It's unrealistic. It's not going to happen, and we've all witnessed that. And we witnessed it in the video, and folks are witnessing it at Nydorf, and we're receiving reports of violence there. So we need to call in more people, and we need to call in truth. I'm gonna refer the commission to a report of work that happened at Rikers Island, Truth Telling and Palabra Project at Rikers Island. And I'm happy to make connections to folks that did the work there. And I'll just read one line. Given the documented history of Rikers Island as a site of extreme terror, the team ensured the trauma and healing response was elevated to the same level as the safety and security response. To do this, the team engaged Black and Indigenous elders. So we need to engage something much stronger in relationship to the extreme terror that's taking place within our county's probation system.
Thank you, Zoe. Next up, we have Leah. Assume that's Zeidler. Maybe not. Leah, you're unmuted.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Youth Justice Policy Lead with UCLA School of Law's Criminal Justice Program, and I'm calling in to urge the Commission to take the strongest actions possible to hold the Probation Department responsible for its hostile approach to the youth in its custody, which has now culminated in bringing to light this most recent egregious act of violence on a young person who was only and simply asking to have their basic needs met. And this current statement is not it. It's not the strongest possible action you could take. Time and time again, we've seen probation's culture on display. It's a culture designed to punish and cause harm, with secrecy and self-survival as its core goal, rather than the care, safety, and well-being of young people. And it's not only this current example of harm. The community is exhausted of hearing about probation's many failures that have made headlines in recent months that have not been addressed. The BSCC findings of unsuitability, probation shutting down Central Juvenile Hall for 90 days, completely traumatizing youth and their families, the failure to eliminate OC spray in 2019, and how about 1/3 of probation staff fail to regularly show up for work on a daily basis. The sexual assault allegations that span decades. And yet, the POC's response here isn't calling for cutting funding to a probation department that's supposed to be phased out. This system that is consistently underperformed, underdelivered, and completely failed to keep youth, staff, and the community safe. There's just no transforming of the culture of this department. This statement needs to call for the firing of the probation staff involved in this incident, the firing of Chief Gonzales and Karen Fletcher for their actions in protecting the officers, and the complete dismantling of the probation department and the transfer of those duties to the Department of Youth Development. Where's the bold action?
Thank you. Next up, we have Laura C. Laura, you're unmuted and you can begin.
I reside in Supervisorial District 2. And like so many others on this call who have already uplifted this, I am outraged, troubled, disgusted, and frankly shaken to my core by the blatant abuse of our young people. It shouldn't take a video like this for us to recognize that probation has been traumatizing, harming, and isolating our youth from their communities and loved ones since its inception. And we've known for a long time that there's been a track record of abuse that has extended far beyond this troubling video. Hundreds of youth came forward just last year and named sexual harm and misconduct that they've experienced at the hands of probation officers. Detailed accounts of youth who are struggling under the control and supervision of LA County probation have shown records, text messages of coercion, of grooming, of sexual harm. And now we see this blatant re-traumatizing physical abuse, and we're supposed to stand by and say nothing and allow for some disciplining to be sufficient? Absolutely not. This is not a department that is safe to interact with our young people at all, period. As others have uplifted, this various types of misconduct that probation enacts on our young people results in a total act of non-competence for the department. They can't be supervising youth at all. These are serial abusers, and it is incomprehensible that someone asked for sympathy and forgiveness on this call. Probation has the power of the state behind them. Being backed up by the state means that a little slap on the wrist for blatant abuse just sends the message that it is okay to do this again. Youth, on the other hand, are coming from disenfranchised, marginalized, and impacted communities, and our young people are not able to have a job and a union backing them up with all this abhorrent abuse of power. This impunity runs through the entire department. Probation must not supervise our youth. We need to preserve their health and well-being, and it's hard to imagine a more vulnerable group of people.
Thank you. Next up, we'll go back to Kent Mendoza. Kent, we're going to unmute you again. Third time's the charm, I hope.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Kent Mendoza. I'm with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. And, I think that, this topic is very, it is triggering, as an individual that actually was in all of these facilities in LA County camps, probation. I've been pepper spray, all that in the compound. I would just say that, ARC, we are an organization that is literally just made of formerly incarcerated individuals, in which mostly of us, almost probably 90% of us, were incarcerated as youth in LA counties. We understand from both youth and staff perspective how these locked up environments can really be for both staff and youth, but also we cannot accept behavior from staff that does not live up to rehabilitation, healing, and restoration, and ultimately the Youth Justice Reimagined vision that has been already approved by the Board of Supervisors like probably 2 years ago. So when when I was locked up, as a young person, I experienced both good and bad staff, but we also have to just start looking at this staff that is not doing their job really well. We need to start holding them accountable for abusing their roles. People working in these camps and halls and just in this environment, that end up abusing youth, whether being physically or verbally, it's just literally a clear indication that they lack the tools and expertise to work with this population. So I would love to see how this probation commission continues to maybe work with the ombudsman's office to really put more pressure on ensuring that, the probation department is doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is protecting kids, and living up to YGR if they can. I think we just need more presence of volunteers, teachers, mentors, credible messengers like the ones that go inside right now to really change the environment culture. I think the more we can change that culture, how bad it is in there, the more likely these types of things won't happen. And as far as holding the overall probation department accountable, I think it's a priority, but asking for firing the shift, I don't know if that thing that'd be making it worse, because we already had, this will be our 6th shift. We don't want another one. It would not create real change. We need bigger change than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kent. We're going to go next to Kruti Parekh. Kruti. Hang on for a second. Okay, Kruti, you're unmuted. You can begin.
Thanks, everyone. Just a lot of gratitude, Dolores, to invite me into this space. My name is Kruti Parekh. I'm a coach for healing and justice. I've come onto this call many times, but today I really want to be able to lean into healing. And so I am going to invite folks. This is an interactive 1.43 minutes. I'd like each of you to take a moment and take a few deep breaths. If you're on screen, feel free to close your eyes so that your eyes are not planted on the screen and on the eyes of other people. This is a moment to turn inward. As you take a few deep breaths, I want you to just give yourself a lot of gratitude for showing up today. You had every reason to not show up today. As you take that next deep inhale and exhale, give yourself a lot of gratitude for showing up. In community, everything is possible. When there are problems, if we come together, we can find a clear way forward. The invitation in this moment is to be deeply connected to your emotions. They are messengers, their energy in motion. Visualize the goal for Youth Justice Reimagined is for us to reimagine what young people needed way before they entered the system. If they did not have it, the system found them. And we're going to need to lean into ourselves, our highest selves, our most creative selves to find a pathway forward. My email is in the chat if you want to collaborate. Troubleshooting on figuring out pathways, please feel free to reach out. Peace and blessings to you.
Thank you, Kruti. We'll go next to Miguel Casar. You still show up as muted on my end, Miguel. Okay, there we go. Miguel, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
You can begin.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all for showing up. Kruti, appreciate the healing and the breath, and also everybody that is speaking to these issues. I think that as harrowing and as disturbing as it is to see this video, another video, it is criminal to know that this has happened and continues to happen in these spaces for a very long time. And at the same time, we've disregarded and dismissed the voices, the testimony, and the experiences of those that are being harmed, precisely because these dehumanizing systems continue to render them criminal and disposable. If we had only paid attention to these young people whose human rights, the rights to safety, the rights to care, the right to an education are being trampled upon every day in these spaces, we would know, and we would continue to know, not only what has happened, but what we need to reenact and to transform and to build systems of care and justice and healing. I think in terms of accountability, once again, this is not a single incident, and it's not about firing chiefs, but it's the byproduct of a broken system that is built on a flawed, baseless, and historically racist logic, and one that has been and is dehumanizing to everybody that it touches. A punitive infrastructure was not designed to bring about safety, but to police injustice. And as this infrastructure grows, injustice and harm continue to grow as well. I hope that this body today that is intended to bring about accountability, that you step into your power, that if you don't have that power, then join us and all the voices and begin to claim the rights to have that power, to hold this institution accountable, to shut them down, and to build humanizing, caring, safe spaces for young people in our county, as we would like for our children and the people that we love. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Next is call-in user number 25. Your number starts with 661. You need to dial *6 on your phone to unmute. And we'll unmute you from our side.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good afternoon. My name is Stacy Ford. I am a member of Local 685, and I am the camp's vice president that represents the union. I want to say a couple of things. First thing I want to say is that the men and the women who work the camps and the halls, we care about our young people. That needs to be understood. We care about the young people that we serve. The second thing I want to say is that you folks talk about probation failures. Those failures came from this commission and the prior commission and the Board of Supervisors. You guys have taken away our resources, you've taken away our tools, and you have not replaced them with anything. Third thing I want to say, transparency. If you're going to show videos, you need to show videos that show where our staff are being stabbed, are being beat down, are being transported by ambulance to hospitals. Be transparent. You're going to show video? Show them all. Thank you.
Our final public commenter is an anonymous call-in user. You're call-in user number 4. So we'll unmute you from our side.
I'm unmuted. You can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. This is Mel. Professionally, I have to question the professional respect that I had for a lot of the commissioners to even allow this video to be shown in this venue. To me, it seems highly irresponsible, and just the level of triggers all over the place. Everybody who's involved in these conversations, and everyone who's invested in these dialogues probably have seen this video already. Issuing a blanketed statement doesn't do it justice. I have not, do not, nor will I ever approve or defend anything being done outside of the norm or outside of what's allowed. But let's have a balanced conversation. Mr. Ford kind of alluded to what I was going to say. We are more than one video. I have personally invited you all to our community advisory committee meetings, our resource fairs. I recognize that several of you follow us on social media, and there's a plethora of positive information there that you do not share here. In keeping with the same balance, like Ford said, where are the other videos of people being stabbed, packed out, knocked out, women being groped inappropriately? And while I'm not comparing that to this video, again, I can't speak to the video because I don't have the jurisdiction to have spoken to everyone involved, and that would be irresponsible of me to do that. But there's more to it. If you have a commissioner that is acting unruly and doing something out of character, and is it okay for me to say all of the commissioners are bad and they should be dismantled? No, that would be irresponsible of me. And lastly, trust me, absolutely no one, DPO, DSO, GSN, supervisor, director, or even the chief, wants to have to put hands on any of these kids. Nobody wants that.
That's your time for today. Commissioner Jackson, we have 2 more people who have signed up since that last one. Do you want to continue with public comment?
I really want to have commissioner discussion on this item, but would like to hear from other public commenters.
Okay, so we've got 2 more, and I think then you can call it
What
off.
I will say though, since those comments came up while we were ending this part of the discussion, we will limit those comments to 1 minute.
Okay, Jennifer, can you change the timer for me? And while we're doing that, we'll call on Megan. And Megan, you're unmuted. You can go ahead and begin, and Jennifer will put the timer back up.
Thank you. The video that my name is Megan Castillo, and I'm an organizer with the Reimagine LA Coalition and a strong supporter of the Layup Youth Uprising Coalition. The video that community members were just forced to watch, it is incredibly heartbreaking and it's unacceptable. We've long known about the physical abuse that goes on at Camp Kill Project and other places where probation officers reside. And just to reiterate, care for young people does not look like surveilling the youth. Care for young people does not look like physical abuse. Care for young people does not look like verbal abuse. It does not look like putting them in cages. Care for young people does not look like exposure to ongoing continuum of violence. The fact that you all are saying, well, they're doing this to us, it doesn't look like an ongoing continuum of violence. Care for young people actually looks like caring for them. It looks like funding resources to support them. It looks like mental health services. It looks like housing. It looks like art. It looks like safe places for them to go. And I echo the demands presented by the Los Angeles Youth Uprising Coalition to cease funding the probation department and to work toward creating systems of care for young
appreciate
folks.
you being here
Thank you.
today. Thank you. We're going to go on to call-in user number 30. Your number starts with 213, and you're going to need to hit *6 on your phone when we unmute you so that you can speak, and you'll have 1 minute.
Hello?
You can begin.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Varden Fan. I'm a member and advocate of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. I was incarcerated from ages 16 to 21. I'm here to speak from real life experience and with truth and honesty. And I'm not going to say fire any chiefs or lock anyone up because they were over abusing their power, using too much spray, or giving harsh punishments for small things to us youth. But saying that will make me a hypocrite. However, I will say that we need to solve this issue by having more accountability, having more mentors for us youth, that we need more people like credible messengers inside of these places. We need to not just hold these staff and probation accountable, but we also need to find a way to talk with youth directly and learn from them. I mean, in order to change the system, we need to invest in components of YGR like credible messengers. Having credible messengers that are permanently incarcerated that listen and know us
Of your time. Thank you very much for being here today, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Jackson.
Thank you. So commissioners, it's very important that we discuss this item because there needs to be a vote, a motion rather, on whether it's accepted or not. And obviously we'd like to hear from everyone before that happens. I will say that I appreciate all of those who commented. I certainly share your disgust and disappointment with what we saw and what we continue to see from the department, right? As chair of this commission, I take full responsibility for all of your criticism, and would also like to say that I see our response to this article in two parts, right? The statement itself addresses what we witnessed in that video. The point was to address the video and article itself. I see the second part of our response as an address to how the chief and probation leadership responded to the video. But for the sake of time, we decided to respond in this statement, and I can promise that there will be future statements and action on this item, even though I understand that people are impatient, or they'd rather the action take place now, that is bold action. I can personally promise that action will take place on this. We just need to get more information about how this was handled and want to be evidence-based in how whatever action we take following this. So commissioners, let's start with Commissioner Meredith.
Okay, I'm probably going to have the most controversial view on this. First of all, I was very appalled when I saw in the video originally. I don't think we should have shown the video today, but when I saw it originally, that was appalling. It was obviously inappropriate, excessive force. The chief did his disciplinary review board. They recommended firing. He overruled them and decided to retain the man. However, we need to be aware, I'm not sure if the department's even aware of it, that there's SB 2 and SB 16, which now mandate that when a peace officer is involved in some kind of incident involving especially discipline of excessive force, they can be decertified as a peace officer and never work in the state of California again as a peace officer. But we need to be balanced in this. You know, we have a lot of hardworking staff in this department. We've had some people that have done things that are inappropriate, absolutely. But a lot of the staff are acquiescing now. I went into Sylmar the other day, and in one of an X, it was completely covered in gang graffiti, including on the windows of the pods. And it's because staff are not going to get involved because they're trying to acquiesce. We also had one officer, or DSO, stabbed this week with a shank at Barry J. We had another one who was assaulted physically in the head. So there is a balance here. We do need to work to do what we can to rehabilitate the youth and give them proper guidance. We do need to figure out what's going on in the department because there is a culture that does need to be changed. But if you look in that video, there was a couple of times that there was somebody trying to de-escalate Mr. Cross. They were trying to de-escalate Mr. Cross, but they were just kind of blown off by him. So there is a significant balance we have. And I guess I get troubled because we're quick to criticize the department, rightfully so. However, we don't recognize any of the good things that staff do. We make quips and quotes that are kind of insulting to staff when there's very many hardworking staff out there. This particular case is troubling. And in fact, one of the future motions I have is going to address how internal affairs and criminal investigations are conducted in this organization. Right now, the DA's office is doing a criminal investigation into this particular incident. So there is follow-up. And like I say, this letter was drafted in a void. I was not part of the drafting of the letter. I saw it after the fact. I agree this whole situation is appalling and should have never occurred. But we also had to look at there's government codes and laws that prevent how we can tell the department to discipline their people. On the other hand, this letter should be addressed to the Board of Supervisors with what our comments and thoughts are. People don't realize we're only advisory. We have no authority over the department except to get the Board of Supervisors to take action. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Meredith. Commissioner Canales. You're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. I want to address, some of the comments. I know that this video was very disturbing, and the reason that I felt that it was so important to show as well is because of we've heard from youth, at times of some of the things that have went on, but without any proof. I myself have lifted up excellent programs, staff that get along great with youth. But one of the things that is so disturbing to me is that the internal disciplinary board, which which Don just mentioned, they actually were going to fire Oscar Cross. That was their determination. Chief Gonzales overrode that in giving everybody a second chance. And also, if we could just think a moment how this all started. He was hungry, something as simple as that. And so, this is very troubling to me. And what's even more troubling is that on Instagram, my picture was posted and I was tagged, as being part of the POC. And it got like 100 likes or whatever. And, but the comments from people that know me and trust me, from people that I know that, we're on this commission for a reason. And I thank Gloria Gonzales so much. I could feel her passion and her energy when she called in, and her commitment to see through, but also her calling us out. And I totally, understand all the things that are needed, but I myself cannot be a facade of an Instagram picture that I'm doing the right thing. I feel that while I do not think at all it's a solution, I think it's a systemic issue. I would like to put forth a motion for Chief Gonzales to resign. I do believe that removing him is not at all going to fix the problem, but I think it would send a very strong message. The problem is systemic. How many chiefs have been replaced, chief after chief? But not only that, I think Oscar Cross needs to be immediately removed. If you look into this, he was put back into Campus Kilpatrick, the same camp that others even have mentioned that was supposed to have all these programmings, all these de-escalation trainings and trauma-informed care and everything else. And he was put back there. The reason he was put back, from what Chief Gonzales said, was because he did not have a disciplinary record, but we also know that a lot of times those disciplinary records do not get filed. They don't end up going in there. So I don't even say that I could trust that. But I do know, to say that the youth was resisting when he was pinned down by two huge officers and all that was moving was his leg, how was that resisting? He probably could not breathe. And so for the officer to get his leg in the guise of do not resist and bend it all the way back to the top of his head because he was hungry, I feel that we are doing a disservice to the community and to the public to continue on. I definitely feel, I agree with everything Commissioner Jackson, as far as more training and everything like that. But I feel that we've been talking about the youth ever since I've been a commissioner. We have not even begun to get into pretrial probation. We have not even begun to get into adult probation and issues, because we're still going on about the pepper spray. We're still going on about de-escalation. And so therefore I would like to put forth a motion that Chief Gonzales resign and that Deputy Probation Officer Oscar Cross be terminated. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Canales. Now, it seems that some action needs to follow the motion that Commissioner Canales made. I personally prefer that Chief be here at this meeting to be able to answer certain questions about this matter. I would ask, though, instead for now, and especially for the sake of being able to respond to Commissioner Canales's motion, Mr. Bettino and Ms. Fletcher, can you guys give us any information about what led to the Chief decision to override the decision to fire Officer Cross?
Commissioner Jackson, I think maybe because there's a motion, and I'm gonna let Amara and Steve correct me if I'm wrong, there needs to either be a second or not on the motion.
Okay.
This is Commissioner Carrillo. I second that motion and think it should go a little bit further. So Commissioner Canales, if you don't mind, I want to second it, but also go even further and say that everyone in that room, all the adults who stood by and chose not to get involved or got involved, should also fall under that same criteria.
Accept that amendment.
I second that.
Okay, motion accepted. Further discussion is needed, right, Wendy? So this is an opportunity for us to discuss that.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so I'm wondering, with those motions, if we're also and perhaps this is more of an amendment, if we're also able to request all the information from probation management that led to Chief's decision to do that, because that was the next step in this process anyway. But it's very, very important to me that our decision is not only based on the video itself, but also based on real action that took place following that. We've heard about what happened, and we know that Chief overrode that, but I need to know more about the meetings that took place and any kind of records, any kind of material information about what led to that decision before that actually happens. Is that possible? And other commissioners, do you agree?
I got to point out that I don't think we can do that pursuant to Government Code 3300, which would protect the Peace Officers' Bill of Rights, if you will. There's also contract issues, and there's some labor laws that would probably prevent that information from being revealed to us.
I think I would also ask if Eric, if you're still here, has OIG already made any of those requests?
Good afternoon, commissioners. That is correct, Wendy. We are in the middle of looking into that ourselves and have made requests for the background information. Excuse my voice.
I mean, I certainly support the motion, but I just want that contingency to be in place so that the decision is based off of that. Moving on, other commissioners have their hands raised. Commissioner Kakani.
Thank you. I have a bunch of comments. I'm just gonna put them all out there. I'm truly struggling to hear my voice like over my heartbeat because I am horrified, I'm disgusted, I'm nauseated, I'm heartbroken. Not just the first time I saw this video, but the subsequent times I've watched this video and today. Like, that doesn't subside at all. And it's not enough to call this an aberration or hands-on, like it's important to acknowledge that this is child abuse, and that if this happened in anyone's home, there would have been a DCFS investigation. This child would have been removed from that home, and that parents' rights would have likely been terminated. And yet, as a county, we continue to invest $410 million into that abuse, whether it's happened once or whether it's happened hundreds of times. But I think we can all accept that it's probably happened hundreds of times. And part of the problem is that this is really an institution that has existed without any sort of real accountability, whether there's a federal consent decree, whether there's a DOJ lawsuit, whether there are hundreds of lawsuits related to incidents of sex abuse, violence, and predatory behavior at the hands of probation officers. And it's like, even in this space, we just like thrive on non-answers, like non-committal statements. Nothing that resembles like an apology, an acknowledgement, an admission. And like there does need to be a sense of urgency, because this isn't, again, the first time. It's like one of many. And there's, oftentimes this reference to like bad apples, but like, what use are good apples if they do nothing to stop these few alleged bad ones? And it's really kind of an illusion. It's a convenient way to ignore a much more fundamental and pervasive problem with the institution as a whole, the union that makes it up, the investment that the county makes. The bad apple theory isn't going to end this brutality. And I just wanted to name, like there are callers who talked about like we've taken away resources. Frankly, we don't have the power to take away resources, but this is an institution that gets $410 million to incarcerate our young people. Whether that goes to salaries, benefits, programming, the maintenance of the facilities, it's $410 million of resources. So it's unclear what else is necessary, especially in concert with the fact that this is one of the lowest incarcerated youth populations. And also just to name that this is the Probation Oversight Commission, not the Incarcerated Youth Oversight Commission. So I just think it's important for us to remember that as we're calling out the, in quotes, bad behavior of young people. And so I don't know, I think there really does need to be a sense of urgency in the way we act. I understand that, there's a desire for this to happen in like a methodical or two-pronged approach, but I don't know how much more time we can let go by and look the other way or patiently wait for solutions related to the harm that this system is perpetuating and the generations of trauma that we are condoning, and the fact that we are in essence okay with simply preparing young people for prison, because I don't know how you walk out of that situation and don't use drugs or don't find yourself engaging in harmful behavior that lands you in an even more harmful situation. So just wanted to name that.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kakani. Commissioner Garcia-Lays.
All right. So I'm going to confine my comments to the motion at hand and not to the video. I helped draft the letter, and I considered suggesting calling for Chief Gonzalez's resignation. The reasons are not just this. I don't feel like we've seen any real progress towards spinning the juvenile part of probation off, which was one of the main reasons to bring him in. He's not shown effective leadership around a permanent secure youth facility. His decision to close down Central was terrible. And now his decision to override the recommendation to terminate this one employee, I find wrong. However, so yeah, my first thought was like, well, there's strikes 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we hit strike 3, but this is not baseball. And the next question I have to ask is, so what happens if he's removed? Who takes his place? Do we have a rudderless ship? For how long? Do we see one of the assistant chiefs take over? And I don't see any of the likely results of the chief's removal being improvements. So while I understand the motion, I would not be able to vote in favor of it until I was convinced that something better would come next, which maybe could be done, but it has not happened at this meeting. That's it.
Commissioner Meredith.
Sean took the words out of my mouth. I support what Sean just said. Thank you.
Okay, so it looks like this leaves us at a vote, correct, Wendy? We need to vote on the motion and decide where we go from here.
Correct. So are we ready for that?
Yeah.
Okay, so on a motion by Commissioner Canales, seconded by Commissioner Carrillo, you are voting to make a recommendation for the termination of the chief, Oscar Cross, and all adults who were standing by in the video. Does that sound correct, Commissioners Canales and Carrillo? Okay, I'm going to read the vote. Were you going to say something, Chair Jackson?
Well, yeah, I'm wondering because again, I'm in favor of the motion, but with the contingencies that I mentioned. And so how to, I mean, should we amend it or should I just want to be very clear because that's important to me.
So the contingencies that you mentioned were regarding the
We're
request
getting more background information on what led to the chief's decision. Like the decision was made, and so that's strong enough. But I still need to see kind of what led to that, who was involved in it, and I'd like for that to happen.
So I think that's a question for Commissioners Canales and Carrillo.
Yes, I feel that that's a very acceptable friendly amendment because I also still have the same questions. Who else was involved in this decision to override the Internal Disciplinary Review Board along with Chief Gonzales? And I understand Don's comments, or I don't know, Sean's comments, one of them, about not knowing what is next. But I believe that even not knowing what is next is still better than just accepting what we have right now, which has been problematic far beyond this video.
Commissioner Carrillo?
Commissioner.
I'd like to stress as well that this is a two-part motion. It's one motion with two topics in it. And I totally, you know, just for the respect of my colleagues, I hear their points of views and don't want to disagree with them and just, you know, stand firm with my own. But I think that many would say that the ship has been without a captain for many years. And so the idea that we're using language as if the chief is just in a tough storm right now, and he's looking for a safe harbor, is something I want to push back on, because the reality is that he came in with a very difficult job, and I think it's only gotten worse. So I respect my colleagues' you know, way of framing it, but I think those within probation and those who are now having to give insight and point things out that are happening in the last couple of years would agree with my comment that this is a bigger problem, and removing the chief sadly would either I hope would make things better, but others might think it wouldn't even matter.
I'm sorry I spoke over you, Chair Jackson. I was intending to ask Chair Carrillo if he also accepted the friendly amendment regarding the request for information leading up to the chief's decision.
Forgive me, Wendy, I do.
Thank you. Okay, did you want me to call the roll, Chair Jackson?
Yeah, I'd like to hear Don's final thought before we do that.
I was just gonna say, it might be fair just to have him invite the chief to be here for the meeting so he could hear all this before we make this motion, but it's a little late now.
Yeah, I think it's a bit late for that now. Shall we move forward with a vote?
Okay, please unmute yourselves, commissioners. Commissioner Canales?
Aye.
Commissioner Carrillo?
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia-Leyes?
No.
Commissioner Kokani?
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis?
Aye.
Commissioner Meredith?
No.
And Chair Jackson?
Aye.
So with 5 yes votes and 2 no votes, the motion passes.
Okay, so we've lost quite a bit of time, and I think it was well worth it. I mean, these are deeply difficult things to sort of discuss and reconcile, but I feel good about the result from that item. I think it's appropriate to maybe table the next two discussions or next two items rather for a special meeting next special meeting next week if other commissioners are in favor of that, just to make sure that we're not cheating these items of the discussion and the action that they deserve as well. Wendy, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask whether you wanted to entertain a motion about accepting the statement.
Yeah, very, very important. Sorry, let's take a step back. Yes, we should vote on whether commissioners accept the statement. Sam, is your question in relation to that part of the
My question,
previous
there's a
motion?
second motion that I want to add. I don't think it should only be Chief Gonzales. I think we should also add Chief Fletcher to this.
I second.
And I say that I voted for Chief Fletcher to help lead this department. And it's not just the chief. This is like, in my opinion, I think it's both. There's inner conflict within the probation officer between SYTF and other factions that don't get along. There's information that's not being shared, that's not being pushed up to the chief, so he can't make informed decisions. And I think it's just like, it's all of it. If the chief should go, so should the deputy chief, and we need to start all over. I don't think it's fair for the chief, who by the way, I like, and who's currently, I believe, if my information is correct, he's sick. He has COVID, if I'm correct. He's not here to at least speak to this. Chief Fletcher is here to speak to this. And I think if we're going to say Chief Gonzales should go, then we should also, Chief Fletcher is over the juvenile facilities. I will say this also, when new staff was put in place, or new managers or leaders in the juvenile facilities, I disagreed with some of the picks that were put in place because it came from advice from some people that are in middle management that have favorites, that don't have the skill and capacity or understanding of how to run a Barry J or SYTF. There are some directors that do incredible work in these facilities. Director Williams, Director Bacon, these are people that go in and work with these young people and calm them down and will speak to them and use no force. And yet those are not the voices that are being put forward to lead the compound, whereas one of the places that we're having the most problems. And so if those voices or those leaders that can really help solve this problem are not being considered, then I think that's a top-down problem. That's a top-down issue. Right? These are facts. If you do your homework, there are other. I'm certain there are others that will tell you. Like I've gone into juvenile hall at 9:30 at night, and who's there? Those directors. Who's leaving? Who's there early in the morning? Those directors. And so when you have people like that, and by the way, one of the two has already put in retirement papers because he's like, no one's listening to me, and he's doing the work. Well, you don't want to lose good people. And so just being honest, I think if we're going to motion for the chief, then it should also be said for the deputy chief too.
Okay, Commissioner Canales' hand has been raised. Let's hear from you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. I agree with Commissioner Lewis's motion, and I have often felt that that Chief Gonzales would not stand up because of Chief Fletcher's advice, just even from the different things that we've experienced, like the moving from Central to Barry J. Everything was constantly directed. All the questions were constantly directed. He, you know, would hand over the answers. And I felt like if we can't have, we need a strong leader. We need a strong chief that's going to stand up for the youth, that's going to stand up for probation, you know, to do the right thing. And so I do feel that that's a very important motion. And I also just wanted to, I'm so sorry, I forgot. I wanted to say something else, but I can't remember. But I just really appreciate Commissioner Lewis raising this issue. And I'm so excited about this meeting because I feel like we're moving in a direction of where we're, as the POC, we know we have to move forward in a different way because things just are not changing.
Commissioner Meredith.
I'm not in disagreement with Sam's motion per se. However, we have to understand that all this is a Board of Supervisors rule, not ours. All we can do is make this recommendation or request of the chiefs to consider this.
Understood. All right. I think it's safe for us to move forward with the motion. I would also say that it's difficult to itemize individuals for the sake of this motion, only because, again, part of the reason I requested the background information is because you really want to understand. We know that this is a microcosm of a bigger issue, and it's very, very important to understand who makes the decisions behind the scenes and how is the chief being used, right? And so it's very important to me. And I know it seems like people prefer not to be methodical about this. Everyone's run out of patience and they want us to make those decisions right out of the door. But for me, it's been really important to sort of be able to dig at the structure and understand who does what, who's responsible for what, who's being scapegoated, who's really responsible here. And so generally I support that, but it's very and equally important that I understand the power play and who's truly responsible for where we are right now. And so I support it, but I'm wondering if it should just be something generalized, like all parties involved in the decision to override the termination of Officer Cross, including, you know, Chief Fletcher, Chief Gonzales, whoever's involved, to be honest. Commissioner Lewis?
Thank you, Chair Jackson. My decision is not just based on Campus Kilpatrick and what transpired there. My decision is based on, or my reason is based on everything that has been transpiring since new leadership has come into play. So it's not just Campus Kilpatrick and what happened to that young man in Campus Kilpatrick in 2020. It's the fact that when literally you have people that are telling you a youth is in danger and you shouldn't put him there and it's ignored, that's unacceptable. If I were a staff and you told me that this kid is in trouble, if you put him there, then I'll be like, okay, I'm not moving him until I know where I can put him where he'll be safe. And when that doesn't happen and multiple layers of leadership is aware of it, and then this kid gets slashed, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. And when those things transpire, like the reality is someone, and no one was held accountable for that. It was like, we couldn't put him here. We couldn't put him there. To me, it's dysfunction within a system. I said specifically that either there are elements within probation I want to see SYTF fail, or the elements that want to see the chief and the deputy chief fail. And I said this to them both. And if you're aware of these things that are transpiring and you're not doing anything about it, then what? The last thing I'll say is this. I've heard some of the calls where people talk about, have spoken about, it's this commission's fault that this is happening. Take accountability for what you're doing or not doing. That's part of it. It's probation's fault. If you want to blame this commission too, it's my fault too, but it's everybody's fault because it takes all of us to keep these kids safe. I want staff to be safe too. Don't get me wrong. I want to see probation staff be in a safe environment also. But these are children that are trusted. Though they've come afoul of the law, they're in our care. And it's our responsibility to make sure that they're safe and they're taken care of, period. At the same time, we do want to provide a safe environment for the staff that work in there. But these are also the most marginalized and those that don't have a voice. And so their voice sits here in this commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Can we have that motion restated before we move forward with the vote?
I'm happy to restate what I wrote down was a motion. I think it was a brief motion by Commissioner Lewis to recommend that the Probation Oversight Commission also recommend the termination of Chief Fletcher, which was seconded by Commissioner Canales. Did I miss something there, Commissioner Lewis?
I think we covered it all.
You're ready for me to call the roll call, Chair Jackson?
Yes.
Okay, please unmute yourselves and vote yes, no, or abstain. Commissioner Canales?
Aye.
Commissioner Carrillo?
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia-Lays?
Aye.
Commissioner Kokani?
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis?
Aye.
Commissioner Meredith?
Aye. Aye.
And Chair Jackson?
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
Now, Wendy, is the request for information included? Can we request something separate from that? I know OIG is working on that, but we need to have our own process for reviewing that background information.
I believe from my understanding, and I'll go over this with County Council tomorrow, but that from the way you framed the information, you've made the request for information. If that request is deemed to be confidential or not able to be provided for the reasons Commissioner Meredith mentioned, laws, or because it doesn't fit under the ordinance for the Probation Oversight Commission, then the next step is to ask the Office of the Inspector General to review that information as our investigatory arm, which it sounds like from Eric that they're already working on. And then we could ask for a report back from the Office of the Inspector General. Amara, does that sound like the right answer? Or Stephen? Sorry.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Wendy.
Does that answer your question, Chair Jackson?
It does. I just want to make sure that that's in process because even though we feel very strongly about the motion that was made, as I've said many a times in this conversation, I need to be able to review all of that other information that led to that decision to that's it. Okay, moving along. As I was saying earlier, we have a couple of other items here that we need to discuss, but we are very short on time. And so I wanted to perhaps table 2 items that require votes for a special meeting next week. That would be the item concerning the gun auction and SYTF, correct, Wendy?
That's
Yes.
correct. Items 7 and 8.
Okay, yes, item 7 and 8. So do we need to get some sort of vote to push that?
Yes, I think you've made a motion. You could say that explicitly if you want, but there it needs to be seconded and then voted on to table those items and delegate to me or really Janae to help schedule a special meeting as soon as we can.
Okay. So please accept that as a motion, and any other commissioners that are in favor of tabling these 2 items to next meeting or for this special meeting, please express that here.
I second the motion. I feel that right now, like I feel so mentally drained. I don't even know if I'd be able to hear the motion if we went through it. So I would appreciate it.
Sure. Wendy, can you facilitate a vote for this, seeing that it's been seconded by Commissioner Canales?
Okay.
Oh, Commissioner Carrillo, we'd like to hear from you before that happens. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Chair Jackson. I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly. Are we saying these will be pushed over to March 2nd versus
No.
till next Thursday?
No, not necessarily next Thursday. I think it's to schedule a special meeting, which could be
For next
scheduled
week.
anytime, as soon as we can get everybody, or at least a quorum available.
But for sure next week. We're not talking about making this part of.
Right. Hopefully
It's
we
a
can. get
priority
everybody-
meeting and it would be scheduled for next week. Yeah.
Okay, I want to just flag that I can't do 27, 28 of next week.
Okay.
Appreciate that note, Commissioner Carrillo.
I guess the one interesting factor in that is that we will likely have 2 new commissioners as of next Tuesday. So, okay, so I'm going to call the roll on Commissioner Jackson's motion to table items 7 and 8, which was seconded by Commissioner Canales. Please vote yes, no, or abstain. Commissioner Canales?
Aye.
Commissioner Carrillo?
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia-Lez?
Aye.
Commissioner Kakani?
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis? Actually, I think, oh, yeah, there you are. Thank you. You moved around on my screen. Commissioner Meredith?
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson? Chair Jackson?
Aye. Yeah.
Thank you. So
Aye.
that motion passes unanimously.
Okay, so let's move on to agenda item number 9, where we discuss matters not posted on the agenda, correct? I just want to make sure I'm on track here. We're on item number 9?
That is correct. I think that there was no motion under item number 6 on the statement, but maybe that's intentional.
Yeah, I'd like, can we table that as well? Like, because we have other motions that intend to sort of address that in some way. Unless, I mean, do we have to accept the statement at this particular meeting?
Stephen, I'm looking at you. Do they have to vote on it?
I think you have some options. You could do a motion to continue that item to another day, I think. You will have to make some sort of motion or some sort of action, whether it's to do that at a different day, different meeting or whatever. It's up to you all. And then you probably should do public comment on it either as well if you haven't.
Yes. So yes, we definitely have to do general public comment at the end. But so it sounds like we should either do a motion to continue or take an up and down vote on the statement or take some action on that statement.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should move forward with the motion, and I'm now wondering, because the way that, again, I was seeing this was sort of in 2 parts, if it would be possible to revise the statement based on the second part of that, which is also tied to the previous motion that was made, and then that we can at that point, we can have that motion approved.
I think
That's a little
that's
bit confusing.
That's Stephen's suggestion that it could be continued to a future meeting.
Okay, okay, cool. Well, I move to table this motion for our next meeting where we can decide if it's acceptable based on any revisions we make to it.
I second the motion.
You want me to
All
call
right,
the roll?
commissioners, let's vote. Yes.
Okay, so this is a motion to table item number 6. Is that right? The LA Times statement to our next meeting. And you can vote yes, no, or abstain. Commissioner Canales,
Yes.
Commissioner Carrillo,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia-Lays,
Yes.
Commissioner Kakani,
Yes.
Commissioner Lewis,
Yes.
Commissioner Meredith,
Yes.
and Chair Jackson.
Yes.
Did I skip someone or I just didn't write down one of the votes? No? Everybody voted. Okay, it's 7-0.
All right, moving along to agenda item number 9, where I expressed that we'll be covering matters not posted on the agenda. This is not where the public comment, but I wanted to mention a couple of announcements, which is one, Diane Terry and Eduardo Mundo have been confirmed to appear on the board's February 28th agenda for appointment to the POC. So we're looking forward to hearing back on that and hopefully welcoming the two of them to the Probation Oversight Commission. And we also welcome our newest member of the POC, Belinda Mayaro. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly, who is our Community Services Coordinator. Wendy, did you have any comment on our newest member?
Oh, sure. Belinda is fantastic, and her job is mostly to outreach to families, people who have been involved in the probation department, stakeholders, groups we will be encouraging to participate and share information. Belinda is a true community organizer, and we're really happy to have her on the team. Thank you for giving me the chance to say that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We will now move on to agenda item number 10, which is an invitation for members of the public to address the commission on items not on the agenda. I'd just like to say that since we have had quite a bit discussion, we're short on time. So unfortunately, I have to limit discussion to 1 minute, but we certainly welcome all those who have something to say to express that here during this item.
Thank you. So if you'd please raise your hand if you'd like to make public comment on items not on the agenda. We do have one item of written comment on this topic that was attached to will be attached to the minutes and was sent out to commissioners. I see one hand. So Jennifer, you can put 1 minute on the timer and we'll call. We've got a couple hands coming up now. Thomas, you're going to go first and you can begin as soon as actually, you know what? I see Commissioner Lewis's hand up, and I think this is actually on something you wanted to talk about on item number 9. That's me trying to read your mind, Commissioner Lewis.
Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you. Our item number 9, we're talking about the recommendations that were attached, correct?
No, about future agenda items.
Okay, so future agenda items. I would like to have clarity. This is an agenda item that I'd like to have, or even be able to have addressed today. So in front of me, I have a little sticky pad of things that I jotted down. That these are things that you can't wear in the juvenile hall for visitors. You can't have visible tattoos like the tattoo of my wife. So can't. That's one. Hats. No beanies, no belts, no sunglasses, including those that transition like these that I need to read. No jewelry that can be seen. So my watch and my earrings I have to take off. These are things that are posted when you go in and that have recently been enforced little by little. First it was the beanies when it's cold. For instance, this Saturday, it will be cold. It will be visiting day. Families cannot wear beanies. It's cold now. Imagine standing outside waiting to go inside. There's normally the use of lockers outside where you can leave things. At Barry J now, you're not allowed to do those. So visitors cannot put their beanies or their watches or anything. They have to walk all the way back to their car because the lockers are dirty and probation doesn't want, or Barry J, I don't want to say just probation in general, but this particular facility has determined that you can't use those lockers now. More importantly, how do you walk around without a belt? And this is not only being applied to visitors, it's being applied to contractors that are going in to provide services. So can we put this on the agenda to discuss? Can we can we have a common sense conversation about being able to wear a hat when it's 40 degrees and raining outside, being able to wear a belt so that you're not walking around with your pants sagging? And do people have to actually take off their earrings and bracelets and watches before they go into a facility? And I say that from two different perspectives. One, from the perspective of going into Barry J, and the other perspective going into maximum security prisons, including Pelican Bay and other prisons across this country, and never having to have to do these things. And so, even more importantly, this Saturday when people go to visit, we are hearing about this huge storm that's coming. Will we actually make families, moms and dads that are coming to visit their children stand outside and be cold when they could simply tell them when they come into the visiting cubicle, please remove your beanie or your hat and send it through the metal detector so we can search it? That's a common sense solution. So I like the dress code, more specifically the dress code and how it's applied not just to visitors, but also how is this being applied selectively to some contractors.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Lewis. Let's move on. That's been noted for the leadership body to discuss for future agenda items and public comment now. On item number 10, just to be clear. Wendy, I think you're muted.
That would really help for me to unmute. Sorry about that. We're going to start with 1 minute public comment on items not on the agenda. And we'll begin with Thomas. Thomas, as soon as we can unmute, you can begin.
Hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One item I would like for next meeting to be discussed. We had two attacks in the halls. One where a GSN was pretty much was stabbed with a shank, and another one where our staff was beaten up and sent to the hospital at Kilpatrick. Can we discuss that at one of the meetings? Can we add that into the agenda and have the same outrage for that as we did for the video? I'm just wondering if we could do that as well, since the commission is supposed to be unbiased and for everybody in probation, right? Thank you.
Okay, next up we have James Maddox. James, we're going to unmute you. Okay, you're good to go.
Terrific. You're working on making some excuse me, some systemic changes. Recognize that you're dealing with the union, and I still recommend a book for all of you to read, Not Accountable by Philip K. Howard. And it talks about, I think it'll be a valuable reading for every commissioner and everybody on the commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Miguel Casar. Miguel, you can begin.
Okay, thank you. I just want to share that I find it a bit disappointing that we continue to hear solutions being framed as fixing probation rather than moving away from it, creating a purposeful, just transition both for the systems and for the people who care and the people who are in for systems of support and systems of care, into a new set of systems and actually doing the work that is necessary so that we don't continue to feed into these cycles of harm. I really hope that we can shift the language so that we can actually begin to move into something that works rather than to continue this disaster. And it is also quite a bit hard that we're at a place where we can't hold people accountable because we're afraid that things are going to get worse. And this is actually, these are the supposed to be responsible adults who are we are afraid that are going to make things worse. And these are the same adults that are expecting, they have laundry lists of expectations for youth inside these systems, which I find ironic.
Thank you, Miguel. And we have one more comment. That's Krista Newble, and then that's the end of. Well, we've got two more now. So can we say that this is the end of the list, Chair Jackson? These two comments. Okay, so Krista, you can begin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to, Chair Jackson, I noticed that you have James Baldwin behind you. And one of the things that he said is not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. Is, you know, one of his most famous quotes. And I use that in that picture that you have behind you to bring up that although you guys are trying to make changes, it has to be equitable, and it's not equitable. We can make changes and we can address the issues with the youth, but you have to address the issues with the staff as well. If you're going to demand accountability and transparency, then it should be accountability and transparency for staff and youth. The commission, unfortunately, has only focused on abuse, which I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but you also need to speak on the abuse from youth to staff because it's happening as well. And it needs to be addressed. It'll make it more equitable and fair amongst everyone instead of just focusing on youth as victims and only victims. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, and our final commenter today is call-in user number 4. We'll go ahead and unmute you, and please hit *6 on your phone, and you can begin.
Okay, thank you. The last two commentators already said what I was going to say, part of it, but I was just going to ask, out of professional courtesy, I think it would be more appropriate to, probably have a conversation with the administration before coming in here in a public forum trying to go for people's jobs and asking for removal. I just think it would be the more appropriate and professional thing to do. Everything doesn't happen in the blink of an eye. And the last thing I just want to add is that we still cordially invite you all to join us for the positive aspects that we are providing the community. And I know many of you see it because I see you looking at it on Twitter and Instagram. So, let's add those to the agenda as well, please, for a balanced conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's the end of public comment.
All right, thank you all so much. Today has been a wild but also a rewarding ride. I look forward to our next meeting and following up on some of the things that came up in today's agenda items. We thank you all for your comments. As a quick reminder, be sure to follow us on all social media platforms and subscribe to the YouTube channel at LA County POC. To receive reminders about our upcoming meetings, visit our website at poc.lacounty.gov. To subscribe to our email listing. It is now 3:41, a little bit over time for sure. And it is now time to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for your time.